Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto was in Game of Thrones and wanted the Iron Throne movie. Before we start, please go support marioiale for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistake in character's gender, but of course Naruto is a male. Chapter 1. The great men of Westeros were busy with their Game of Thrones, while another played his own game with something far more alluring. He wasn't an imposing figure, but he held great power within his soul and mind. He could trick you and beat you with his fists. Another world had seen his true power, and the very landscape had been reshaped by it. While men played king, this young man would suck the life out of them. Going behind their backs and through their own families, or rather, through their wives and daughters, he had seen the strength women could wield, and he knew that if he could harness that, he would be formidable. Plus, I really enjoyed the ways I could persuade them. It wasn't as flashy as destroying a city in broad daylight, but it was much more enjoyable. Throughout the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, a blonde-haired demon quenched their thirst for carnal pleasure and would ensnare all in his path. Even the narrow sea was no obstacle for him. He could flow through his clones with the ease of water through a sieve. At that very moment, in the fortress of Winterfell, the halls of King's Landing, nestled in Highgarden, baking in the capital sun spear, and warming in Storm's End, there was a young man with blonde hair and blue eyes panting from exertion. He rode Lady Catelyn Stark, Cersei Lannister, Marjorie Tyrell, Obara Sand, Nymeria Sand, and Melisandre. You could tell he had his work cut out for him, but he was always a believer in true determination, and it helped that he had his shadow clones to work with. Naruto didn't know how he came to reside in Westeros. He only knew that the current regime was lazy and stupid. It was a sham that this had lasted this long, but he would remove the kings and pretenders from their precious throne and truly bring peace back to this land. After all, he was the hero of Konoha. Though that was for another time, he was deep inside Catelyn, and she was riding him with pure abandon. He was surprised by the mother's fervor, but he didn't allow himself to be a spectator to these activities. He was pounding the brunette hard, grabbing handfuls of hair as he slammed into her. She was screaming his name, shouting to the heavens how she would bear his children and leave Eddard. Naruto smiled at the way her eyes rolled in ecstasy whenever he entered her sweet home. He could seep through her other selves, and what he witnessed shocked those who didn't know him well. He was a powerful man by nature, but where he truly shone was in the chambers of the ladies of the house. He currently had Cersei on her knees licking his cream, swirling her tongue around and enjoying the thick treat. 2 clones were spitting on Marjorie, while she happily lost consciousness. 6 clones were having their way with the 2 sand snakes. He could see the appeal of their tan skin and glorious holes. And finally, 3 clones were filling Melisandre to the brim with their cum, and she was happy to agree. In bed, Melisandre was being combined from behind while another used her mouth for what she was good at. It seemed that sweet talk wasn't the only thing Melisandre was good at. Her skills in the carnal arts were well received by Naruto. He had taken his time seducing the fiery priestess, but eventually she too fell under his dominance. Or rather, was she beneath him? He didn't care. He was quite happy to take her from here to Kingdom Come. And he would come all over her luscious body. Her fiery red hair reminded him of his own mother, though that was something that could be considered taboo for him. But if he was honest with himself, he'd harbored some fantasies of a more maternal persuasion. Sucking him down her throat while being double-crossed from behind, it seemed Melisandre had lost all semblance of decorum or dignity. She was just another piece in the chess game Naruto would use to rid the world of these corrupt kings and lords. Her loyalty to her one true god was profound, but Naruto would go deeper and truly break that hold on her. He was already breaking her mind with pleasure. It wouldn't be too difficult to truly earn the devotion of the crimson-haired priestesses. Returning to Cersei, she was found in the same situation as Melisandre. Being spat out by Naruto and his clones was something Jaime could never do. He was just one man, whereas Naruto could field an entire army to please the queen. Her screams were suppressed by the Naruto-shaped gag. Thrusting in and out of the blonde queen's throat, Naruto filled her stomach again and again with his seed. Soon she would be swarmed with cream, and lying back on the fabric was enjoyable for Naruto to watch. Being drilled from behind and pounded on her ass, Cersei thanked the gods that she had succumbed to Naruto. Though that was a foregone conclusion when he had proven his immortality, strength, and the ability to crush all armies by himself. Pumping in and out of her ass, Naruto slapped her red ass and watched it jitter as he ground and thrust into her. Watching the Queen of Westeros with her ass in the air getting drilled by a teenage boy was not something she would ever believe. Her dignity was out the window, all she craved was Naruto. Naruto had intentionally posed as a drug for women. He would pleasure them to their limits, and leave them begging for more. With the use of chakra there was no limit to the amount of pleasurable sensations he could extract from the beautiful women. Feeling the telltale signs of his release, Naruto roared with lust and emptied himself into Cersei. She was like a blow-up doll that couldn't hold its payload. Cream oozed out of every orifice of hers, be it her mouth, lower lips, or her sensational ass. Swallowing Naruto's essence like it was nectar of the gods, Cersei was nothing like royalty. Her stomach couldn't hold any more and her mouth had long been full of cum, so Cersei lay face down in the middle of her king-sized bed covered from head to toe in Naruto's seed. She was more fair than blonde. After all, Naruto's seed overtook her vibrant natural hair color. Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't finished with the queen and threw her ass in the air and drove deep into her again and again. He would show Cersei that he was the only one for her now. There would be no repeat of either Jaime or Robert. Driving her body down onto the sheets, Naruto left imprint after imprint of his supple body on the pillowy softness of the bed. After all was said and done, the bed looked like a mess, and there was a scent of arousal in the bedroom that would linger for days. With her head tilted to the side and her eyes on the back of her head, Cersei didn't see Naruto pick her up and place her on the floor. Nodding, Naruto ordered his clones to clean up, though more accurately, he ordered them to burn all evidence of their tryst with the queen. Grabbing fresh linens from the closet, the clones made quick work of the abused room and made it look spotless. Though they had fun lightly slapping Cersei's lips, she would give each clone a kiss each time they slapped her. Laughing at the sight, Naruto took Cersei in his arms and walked toward the royal bath. He would enjoy scrubbing Cersei thoroughly everywhere. Catelyn Stark had woken from her stupor to find herself still bouncing up and down on Naruto. She would have screamed in pleasure, but Naruto had covered that too. She was a true silver tongue, though that was probably from something else. Naruto was riding her face as if she were riding him, each thrust down her throat, and he was moaning from the tight grip she had on him. He could feel her massaging him with her throat and mouth, and the way she swirled her tongue around him was enough to make him release inside her for a fourth time. Drinking in all she could, Catelyn soon found herself overloaded, and Naruto pulled out of her mouth as he sprayed her hair and face with his seed. She could smell it in her nose and taste it in her mouth and on her lips. It was a sight to behold, with the way the white contrasted with the black of his hair. She wasn't done though. Naruto was still thrusting into her from the front and back. The feeling of being filled was doubly satisfying as Naruto thrust in and out of her. He was pumping her with her legs bowed. The girth was enough to rub all of her sensitive, most pleasurable spots. Her puckered hole would be loose to anyone but Naruto. His width was expanding her completely. She had never been so completely filled in her life. And she hadn't eaten an ounce of food, though she had gotten plenty of protein from Naruto. Soon the pleasure made her dizzy, and she rocked as Naruto continued pounding into her. Climaxing several times from the pleasure, Catelyn didn't hear Naruto give a roar that would have made a lion proud and release inside her nether lips and sweet ass. Lying on the soaked sheets, Catelyn was sufficiently dazed by the fervor of their lovemaking. Overflowing with his seed, Catelyn couldn't contain the amount, and her juices mixed with it to truly ruin the bed. The procession of clones soon began, just as it had with Cersei, and each received a kiss from Catelyn as they performed their duty. Naruto was amused to see the same sight that had greeted him after his adventures with Cersei. Perhaps the Starks and Lannisters weren't so different after all? Though judging by the completely exhausted expressions of both the Queen and Lady Stark, they wouldn't recognize either for the next few hours. Smiling at the screen, Naruto flowed through his clones and soon returned to Marjorie. She was occupied by one of his clones, or rather two. He was still being used as a bridge by the clones, moving in and out at a steady pace. His body was suspended in the air by the two clones. Grilling couldn't have been a more accurate term. Her wavy blonde hair was being used as a hand grip for the clone thrusting into her mouth. Meanwhile, the other clone grabbed her hips and truly drilled into the would-be Tyro lady. With two roars, the clones released themselves into the blonde and filled her from both sides. Her stomach actually seemed slightly larger from the seed flowing into her abdomen. Drinking like a soldier, she joined Cersei and Lady Stark in their futile efforts to overcome the flow. He carefully lowered her onto the bed, the two clones leaning in as Naruto watched his seed flow out of the beautiful maiden. It flowed freely from all three holes, her abdomen having shrunk after coughing up some of his milk, though he continued to lick the excess within reach of his mouth. Smiling at the sight before him, Naruto slowly picked up the future queen and headed to the bathrooms. Nodding at the clones to clean up their mess, Naruto began to clean Marjorie of her little ordeal, though it soon degenerated into another carnal exercise as he mounted her in the tub and spanked her ass. Her mouth was pretty and eloquent, though he was finding another use for it. Surrounding him, she marked him with her lips. They formed a ring he would always return to, at the base of him. Exploding into her mouth and filling her once more, Naruto continued his lustful advances and gently threw her against the tiled walls. Lining himself up directly behind her, Naruto thrust into her warmth and pushed her against the walls. Each thrust sent a tremor through the walls, the water dancing on the floor from the vibrations. Lifting her legs on either side of him, he drilled into her, as she did the splits in the air. Each jarring pulse rattled her brain with pleasure. Soon she was exploding with heat and releasing all over the tiled floor, mixing her own fluid with the water below. His tongue lolling from her mouth, Marjorie was truly, royally bucked. With one last clamp of his tensing muscles, Naruto filled her to the brim with his seed, and I watched as much of it flowed from her to the floor below. Lifting her up even further, Naruto flipped her over and put her mouth right where he wanted her. Marjorie wasn't going to let that nectar go to waste and happily swallowed it whole. Meanwhile, Naruto had brought Marjorie's legs together and had her hold his seed within her heat. Gravity might help from time to time. With most of his seed sucked out, Marjorie gave a few last licks and with an audible pop, he released himself from her delicious mouth. Not one to let things be, Naruto wanted to go to the quartet and see Marjorie as out of it as Caitlyn, Cersei, and Melisandre. Without giving her a moment's respite, he conjured clones out of thin air and gave them the signal to ravage the beautiful woman. She was more than happy to oblige, but she wasn't ready for the fervor Naruto instilled in the clones. They went wild for her, and truly lived up to the nickname of Konoha's most unpredictable ninja. When all was said and done, Marjorie was no better off than Cersei and Caitlyn. Her mind was awash with pleasure, and her lips were sticky with Naruto's. Naruto only had one last question for himself: who would be next on their little tour of this world? Chapter 2. Naruto had found Daenerys when he'd gone in search of the previous royal family that had ruled Westeros all those years ago. Before Robert Baratheon took the throne, it was inhabited by the Mad King. He was a line descended from the dragons of old, or so the old journals said. When he'd encountered the last two remaining members of the royal family, he'd been shocked by Daenerys' beauty and Viserys' idiocy. Waiting for days on end, Naruto had waited for the right moment to present himself to the wide-eyed queen-to-be. It just so happened that Viserys had been feeling particularly cruel one day, preparing to beat up his own sister to sate his frustration with the continued humiliation he'd endured. What he hadn't seen coming was the kick to the back of his useless head. Viserys never found out who had knocked him unconscious, though he suspected it was Daenerys, but had no proof. It wasn't quite the entrance Naruto had wanted, but it served as an icebreaker for him to meet with Daenerys. As she got over the shock of seeing her cruel brother get his ass kicked, Daenerys discovered that Naruto had been following them for a long time. He had told her about the conflict brewing in the distant kingdom, and how it could lead to a war that would divide the realm. If she returned home, then perhaps they could unite the kingdom under one banner and truly bring peace to the common people. She had been suspicious at first. There was no one in the kingdoms who actually wanted to proclaim her queen. They all wanted to cut off her head and use her body for themselves. Or at least that's what Viserys had always said. Naruto didn't force the issue, but continued to visit Daenerys throughout the week and explain the situation across the narrow sea. Ultimately, Naruto knew there would be no reason for Daenerys to return unless something truly drastic happened. And it just so happened that an event that would shape lives beyond the narrow sea would be decided by a massive brute who had been promised Daenerys an army. Viserys had grown tired of waiting, and the cheesemonger had accelerated the timetable for the pact that would bind Daenerys to the Dothraki. Across the narrow sea lay the wasteland the Dothraki had taken as their own, enslaving and pillaging the sands, all for the sake of their false gods. There would be a few Khalasar who would roam the desert in search of new women to rape and men to kill. One such Khalasar was led by the mighty Khal Drogo. He was a fearsome man who fought all who had challenged him, and won to become the leader of the greatest Khalasar seen in recent memory. At that moment, he was on his way to a merchant's house to make a deal with a pompous foreigner for a weak young man. He wasn't impressed by the doe-like gaze or the fear in the young woman's eyes. She wouldn't be strong enough to bear his heir and the next call of his horde. He needed a true Dothraki to give him children who could fight and maul to the best of his ability. Shaking his head at the cheesemonger's putrid offering, he galloped off in search of new prizes. That was until he saw a brief flicker of recognition in the flimsy thing's eye. Khal Drogo glanced back over his shoulder and saw a tiny, puny little man who seemed to walk with practiced ease. The Khal wasn't pleased that his offering showed affection for such a minuscule pest. Deciding he was within his rights to kill the strange foreigner, Khal Drogo rode hard toward the man and prepared to sever his head from between his shoulders. What he hadn't counted on was the agility and finesse the teenager possessed. The boy had walked around him as if he weren't even there. He could see the movements, but he couldn't keep up with his movement to kill the teenager. Turning his stallion, Khal Drogo dug his heels into the horse and galloped toward the teenager. This time he would crush him beneath his feet and show the doe-eyed girl that she was his and his alone. Shaking his head at the brute in front of him, Naruto calmly pulled out a small kunai which he casually tossed toward the idiot. The knife found its mark and the horse collapsed after being hit directly in the head. Khal Drogo was thrown to the ground and slid down until he was face down in front of Naruto. Spitting out rocks and leaves, Drogo was furious that a peasant with a beaming smile on his face was making him look foolish. He would show this upstart that there was no one more fearsome and bloodthirsty in the world. His horde had gathered to stand by their leader, but Drogo signaled them to stand aside. He would be the one to enjoy the blood of this baby who had dared to kill his horse. With a sigh, Naruto assumed an indifferent stance and gave the universal come-to-me gesture. He was bored, so perhaps this little dance would amuse him a bit. He could see that the man in front of him was a beast with brute strength, but he had always been a more cunning opponent. He would always find the weak link in his opponent's armor and exploit it to his advantage. The man in front of him was no different. He had guessed correctly, and Drogo charged with a head full of steam, intent on destroying the teen. Sidestepping the telegraphed move, Naruto delivered a wobbly elbow as he passed. Drogo could feel the contents of his lunch bubbling up his esophagus. Drogo, wide-eyed, couldn't believe this insignificant boy had caused him so much damage. He was the elite of his Khalasar. There was no one who could hurt him with a simple elbow. Unfortunately for Drogo, Naruto was not a patient man. He followed up his attack with a crushing kick that ripped Drogo's legs off his body. Once on the ground, Naruto threw him to the ground and began repeatedly pummeling him with his fists. The way Naruto was built, the blows shouldn't have done anything to Drogo, but he felt each and every one. The power behind them was palpable. It was like being hit by a ton of bricks. Bloodied and shaken on the ground, Drogo wouldn't give up just yet. Getting to his knees, Drogo charged at the teen again, and once again Naruto launched a devastating attack that knocked Drogo to the ground. To say the Khalasar was stunned would be an understatement. There was no one alive who could defeat Khal Drogo. But this mysterious stranger hadn't just beaten the Khal, he'd done it in such a way that he would be humiliated for the rest of his life. It had been such a bright day for Drogo, but it had all ended in misery at Naruto's feet. It was no surprise to anyone who knew the power Naruto wielded. The people of this world were mere ants compared to Madara or Hashirama Senju. Returning to what he'd really come here for, Naruto greeted Daenerys and laughed at her stunned look of disbelief. "How did you do that, Naruto?" "Oh, a little misdirection and some applied pressure, and anyone can beat morons." "He wasn't that special, was he?" Naruto had known who Drogo was all along, but he wanted to downplay the massacre and have Drogo perform one last feat of stupidity. Drogo had the nerve to attack Daenerys to try and get Naruto out of his comfort zone, but Naruto had sensed the pathetic tactic and delivered the final nail in the coffin. Infusing the kunai with wind chakra, Naruto severed Khal Drogo's surprised head in full view of his khalasar. All this was done without turning his head. Naruto had continued his conversation with Daenerys as if he were discussing the weather, when in fact he had murdered one of the most dangerous men this side of the narrow sea. Shocked by the events unfolding around her, Daenerys paled at the horse lord's body at her feet. Finally turning her head toward the man who wouldn't take no for an answer, Naruto placed his coat over the decomposing body and head. Deciding to bring their conversation inside, Naruto gestured to Daenerys toward the open door and the foyer. Looking back at the khalasar, Naruto eyed the few brave enough to dare challenge him. He promised pain to those who even hinted at harming Daenerys. She was now under his protection. After his good brother had tried to sell her to Khal Drogo, Naruto decided to intervene in the matter. He rather liked the young woman. She was as beautiful as the women he had captured in Westeros. And she was pure and good. In this world of corruption and filth, he couldn't believe there were still some among the living here in Westeros. With one last glance at the retreating horde, Naruto signaled his clones to follow the pack and report back on their movements. Entering the cheesemonger's house, Naruto noticed the man's extravagant wealth. There was enough food and wine to feed everyone in Flea Bottom for at least a week. The indulgence was nauseating. He had lived off ramen noodles for most of his youth, and how a man could expect to eat all of this was ridiculous. Sitting at the head of the table was the cheese merchant, happily munching on a whole side of lamb. He was licking the excess fat off his plump little fingers, but stopped everything when he spotted Naruto standing in his dining room with Daenerys in tow. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you? And what are you doing in my house?" "My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm here to get Daenerys back." "Over my dead body? Who the hell do you think you're trying to take my food, I mean my sister?" Disgusted by Daenerys' brother's display of arrogance and selfishness, Viserys was a sniveling little rat. "I don't think I've asked her opinion on it, but I'll ask Daenerys. What do you think? Do you want to go home?" Shocked by Naruto's complete disregard for him, Viserys lunged at Naruto in a berserk rage, serving knife in hand. Naruto easily parried the attack and threw Viserys across the room toward the cocktail table. "As I was saying before I was rudely interrupted, how about Daenerys?" "What? I don't know about that. I can't go back, I'd be killed in the Seven Kingdoms. I'm a fugitive wanted by my lineage." "Oh, you don't have to worry about that, I'll protect you. Besides, I'm sure we could find a disguise or something. I always thought your hair could use a little color." Aside from himself in frustration, the cheesemonger knew all these well-laid plans were going up in smoke. He needed to head this off before he got too carried away. "Sir Naruto, is it? I was wondering if you might possibly make a little proposition to the girl. I mean, can't you be serious about taking her back to King's Landing? She'd be killed on sight." "I speak very seriously. And I don't believe it's any of your business, Illyrio. Unless you believe you have the means to stop me?" Proving he was not without brains, Illyrio Mopatus didn't attack the teenager as Viserys had, though he was sorely tempted to put the boy in the smoker and roast him alive. How did he get here? Still overwhelmed by the events that had transpired, Daenerys still wanted to go home. She hadn't seen King's Landing for so long and had almost accepted that she would die in this horrible wasteland. Not feeling the strength to truly express her desire to go home, Daenerys only nodded to Naruto. Smiling at the gesture, Naruto tipped an invisible hat to Illyrio and guided Daenerys to her room to pack for the journey home. Having sent his clones wandering the surroundings, Naruto knew that the cities on this side of the narrow sea practiced slavery. It was common practice here to have the khalasar capture slaves and sell them to cities like Astapor and Yukai, where they would be trained in whatever was needed. It was a barbaric practice that Naruto knew he would have to rid this land of, but that would be for another time. His first priority was Daenerys' safety, and her safe return to King's Landing. Beyond livid, Illyrio wandered its halls, racking his brain for a way to salvage this horrendous situation. All thoughts came back empty, as he'd seen firsthand how powerful the teenager was, tossing Viserys around like a rag doll. The idiot was still unconscious on its manicured floors. Naruto could flow through his clones at will, but Daenerys couldn't, which was why they needed to take the first ship back to Westeros. With all their clothes packed and supplies provided by Illyrio, though not of his own volition, Naruto and Daenerys set off for the nearest port. Watching his grand plans crumble, Illyrio looked down and saw Khal Drogo's head staring back at him. With a squeal of fear, the fat cheesemonger recoiled in pure terror at the mutilated head. Laughing at the scream of terror he heard on the wind, Naruto assumed the cheesemonger had found his farewell present. He'd better try to sell Danny to that disgusting brute. That pot of lard will soon have company. The Dothraki didn't take the death of their Khal very well. Good work, Kit. I was wondering when you'd show your head, Kurama. Where the hell have you been? I've been keeping your stupid ass alive, while you were out rutting with the country folk. Listen, I don't think Cersei and Caitlyn classify as country folk. And I haven't been in heat. Oh, sorry, Your Majesty, how about we take them to the kingdom? What? Any ideas on how we got here? Your guess is as good as mine. The last thing I remember was fighting that witch. You mean Kaguya? Yeah, I was crazy. I wonder what happened after that. Now that Kurama had mentioned it, Naruto had no memory of the events after his battle with Kaguya. Everything went blank after the battle had started. The last memory he had was when he had woken up in this cruel world with all the hatred and pain permeating the air. It was that feeling of dread and sadness that had set Naruto's plan to fix this world in motion. Though he came to agree with the amount of pleasure it had caused both the noble ladies of the world and himself, he hadn't been confused in the slightest. Team? You there? Yeah, just remembering the things that happened since you left. Oh, I have a general idea about that. Good work though, Kit. I couldn't have done any better myself. Chuckling inwardly at the infamous Kyuubi's praise, Naruto was brought out of his reverie when he saw the dock. Signaling to the captain of one of the ships, Naruto showed him the coin needed to return to Westeros. Pocketing the money, the captain signaled for the two to board and shouted to his men to begin preparations for sailing. With their return underway, Naruto led Daenerys to her cabin. I'd keep your cloak tight, Your Highness. I don't think it's a good omen to be recognized by the crew. Thanks, Naruto, but how did you get the ticket so quickly? I had anticipated that Khal Drogo would come to claim you. Your brother had made arrangements with that fat cheesemonger weeks in advance. Securing passage on this ship wasn't so difficult when the captain saw how much it would be worth to me. Nodding, Daenerys still didn't see why Naruto would do all this for her. Perhaps he wanted to claim the kingdom for himself? But if that had been the case, she could have used Viserys. Her brother was easy to anger but very naive otherwise. It would be a piece of cake to lure him with women, gold, or an army. Why go through all the trouble to rescue her? Naruto had killed Drogo so easily that Daenerys was under no illusions that she could be dispatched just as easily. Sensing Daenerys's distress, Naruto took her hands in his and made her look into his eyes. I promise I won't let anything happen to you, Danny. That's a promise for life. Shocked by the sincerity in the young blonde's eyes, Daenerys knew that if he wanted to harm or kill her, he couldn't leave her side. Either he was the greatest liar in the world, or he truly intended to place her on the Iron Throne once again. Smiling at the teen, Daenerys nodded and hugged Naruto tightly. Surprised by the hug, Naruto shrugged and hugged Daenerys with equal joy. It would be an interesting journey now that all the players were arriving at the board. Naruto wondered how well the others would take this turn of events. Chapter 3. Illyrio Mopatis had lost his golden goose, but at least he still had the three greatest treasures in all the land. There was no discounting the price and the power these 3 dragon eggs could wield. Some said they could buy a small army. Illyrio would need him when the Dothraki arrived to cut off his head and collect whatever he could carry. The burly man left his villa to catch the next boat out of this hellhole. Essos was not the promised land of opportunity he had hoped for. The thought of cavorting with these savages was enough to infuriate any decent man. Was he likely to lose his mind over this now? He wouldn't die for the mere whims of a silly girl and that mustachioed brat. He would get revenge on both of them. While Illyrio was having this internal struggle with himself, one of the clones Naruto had left behind discovered the hidden treasures. The clone knew those dragon eggs would be very valuable in the upcoming war. Whoever had the dragons would be the de facto ruler of all the lands, though it remained to be seen whether those things would hatch in the first place. Slipping into the shadows, the clone snuck up behind the fat man and quickly relieved him of his precious cargo. Illyrio felt the sudden shift in weight, but when he looked back, he saw nothing. Shaking his head at the ghosts, Illyrio continued in search of his boat. Laughing at the merchant's idiocy, the clone followed him back to his original location. He was so glad he didn't have to worry about another person on his travels. They would only have slowed him down. Racing across the barren landscape, the clone had reached the port in record time. It helped that Kurama was back and that the clone could feel his chakra slowly flowing through his veins once more. Without flinching, the clone leaped off the docks and continued running through the water without slowing down. What a great ninja! Especially one in this world filled with mortal men and women. This was what Madara had felt when he'd faced the other Kages. But that was something for another time. Right now, the most important thing was getting the eggs back to the original. Back with Naruto and Daenerys. He could feel his clone running toward them and see that he was carrying something truly momentous in his hands. The dragon eggs would be priceless in the coming war. He was glad the clone had the chance to obtain them. And fleecing the cheesemonger was just the icing on the cake. Naruto carried the sleeping Daenerys to bed. Once he was sure she was asleep, he headed to the upper deck to greet his clone. He didn't have to wait long. The clone was about 30 meters away. With a mighty leap, the clone scaled the deck and handed the precious loot to Naruto. Nodding to the clone, Naruto gestured for him to rest with Daenerys while he examined the tough specimens. Are these things still alive after all this time? Those dragons are stubborn little bastards. Watch out for them, Kit. You may be immortal, but Daenerys isn't. I wouldn't want you to lose your new mate so soon. I know, Kurama. But I couldn't leave him with that fat bastard. Yeah, I can see how that would have gone badly for us. Naruto was still amazed that there were real-life dragons in this world. It wasn't common to see them even in his old world. Deciding to handle these matters later, Naruto sealed the 3 eggs in one of his scrolls. Looking out over the seas, Naruto could feel a tug on his consciousness. One of his clones had discovered something exotic that would be a welcome addition. Astapor. Missandei had just been slapped for speaking out of turn again. Her master in Astapor wasn't what one would call forgiving of mistakes. It was only because she was so eloquent, knowledgeable, and beautiful that she was spared the harshest punishments of this hellhole. She watched as more and more unsullied were paraded in front of their potential buyers. She was disgusted by the display, but she knew she was powerless to change what was happening here. What did catch her attention was one of the newest customers. He was a teenager in every way, but he maintained a certain machismo. What really caught her attention was the pure blue in his eyes. She had never seen anything like it. It was mesmerizing and fascinating to the beautiful maid and translator. She had hoped he would buy some of the unsullied just for the chance to speak with him. Naruto was appalled by the standard of living and the horrible treatment of the people in Astapor. Although his clone had found a truly remarkable woman, she was like a jewel in this wasteland of horror. Her name was Missandei, if the information from her clones was to be believed. It was a beautiful name for such a lovely young and voluptuous woman. Signaling to the supervisor, Naruto wanted to speak to Missandei's master to see if he could buy some of the slaves. The master himself was a horrible man, who believed it was not good to speak the common language with strangers. He only spoke in Valerian and had Missandei translate. Though what she translated and what he actually said weren't always the same. After all, he insulted every client he did business with. My most worthy of masters, ask what is your name, sir? My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and who do I have the pleasure of speaking to? My name is Missandei, it's an honor to meet you, Master Naruto. No, Naruto is fine. Master sounds so bad. Smiling at the teen, Missandei was getting off the topic of shopping. As her teacher reminded her with his cutting remarks. Go ahead and stop flirting with that hell spawn. I'll beat you senseless if she doesn't buy anything for all this wasted time. Ask that son of a hitch how many he wants. Yes, love. How many would you like, Master Naruto? Sighing at the teacher's continued use, Naruto nevertheless offered 5 of his fingers. 500? Not 5,000. Do you want to buy 5,000 unsullied? No, I want to describe how many of my men will take over this city. Shocked by the comment, Missandei tried to translate for her master without stuttering. This teenager had just declared war on Astapor and its masters. She was going to die at his feet. She couldn't watch the horror unfold. Does this son of a hitch have the nerve to threaten us? Kill this man where he stands, and make him die slowly. Turning her head, Missandei didn't want to see the carnage. She had only just met the young man, and now he would be gutted in front of her. What she hadn't counted on was the squeal of surprise her master gave her. When she opened her eyes, she saw Naruto standing exactly where her master had been, already on the ground, with another Naruto pointing a short knife at his master's throat. Tell him if he doesn't call his slaves, I'll slit his throat from ear to ear. Shocked by this turn of events, Missandei translated for Naruto. Kill this man! I will not be bullied in my own city! The Unsullied attacked again and again, but Naruto repelled them. He disarmed the teenage warriors and knocked them out with well-placed blows to their temples. Having had enough of this, Naruto slit the man's throat and took the whip from his hand. Throwing it to the ground, Naruto saw to his surprise that the remaining soldiers were standing still. What's going on? You took the whip from my master. They are now yours to command. Still shaken, his master lay dead at his feet with a horrified expression on his face. Shrugging and allowing himself to be led, Naruto took the whip and instructed Missandei to translate for him. You are now free to do what you want and live how you want. You are no longer a slave to these masters. It is up to you what you do with your life. But if you want to follow me, I will guide you to a land of lush meadows and food beyond your wildest dreams. Naruto could see an opportunity when he had one. With this army he really could take back Westeros from the corrupt and powerful houses. The Unsullied united as one and roared their approval of this newfound endeavor. Naruto now had his army of 20,000 Unsullied warriors. He would have to train them a bit, but they would make good warriors for the coming conflict. Stunned by this turn of events, Missandei simply continued to gape at the teenagers, lamenting their disregard for anything resembling senses. He had taken over the city of Astapor in a few minutes, and now had the Unsullied ready to march with him anywhere he wanted to go. He exuded power and madness in equal measure, but the most intoxicating thing was the grin on his youthful face. He looked like he didn't have a care in the world. What kind of man was this? How could he just kill someone without doing anything but smile as if it hadn't ever happened? This was a dangerous man, someone who had taken numerous lives before. Missandei had to be careful with this man. Returning to what had truly brought him here, Naruto could see the fear and nervousness in Missandei's brown eyes. He had wanted to do this without so much loss of life, but the Benders wouldn't relinquish their control so easily. He had to set an example for the others to see. There was nowhere safe for those who would willingly force others into slavery. He didn't want to scare Missandei, but he needed to get this resolved before he could return to Daenerys. I'm sorry about what you had to see. I didn't want you to get mixed up in this. I needed to finish this, Missandei. I hope you see that in time. Walking away, Naruto had screwed his damsel in distress mission. He'd always had a bit too much of a hero complex, but it kind of came with the territory when you were the child of prophecy. Missandei hadn't expected Naruto to apologize, but the teen's actions gave her pause. Though if she didn't follow Naruto, who would stay in this ruined city? Their master was dead, and now the person who had given each slave their freedom was leaving as well. Wait, I see that was a good thing. But did you have to kill all the masters? I knew they wouldn't release their slaves voluntarily. It was either them or you, and I'd gladly choose you any day of the week. Smiling politely, Naruto traced Missandei's face with his hand. A shock ran through her at his touch. She had never been touched so gently and carefully. The two of them walked away from their master's rotting corpse and headed for the city's port. The entire population was in an uproar due to Naruto's release. The Unsullied would follow Naruto while the rest would stay and try to save what lives they could in Astapor. There would be conflicts along the way, but the people were better off in the end. At least they were free and would be fed for the first time in a long time. What had once been slave barges transporting men and women to the city to be shackled would now take them to a new, more prosperous place. The barges would join the main ship housing Daenerys when they arrived in Westeros. For now, there was the matter of finding supplies for the long journey ahead. Most of the Unsullied had never left Astapor, so this journey was a strange one for them. Naruto had summoned multiple clones to organize and furnish the trip. The clones supplied the necessary provisions and water for the journey across the narrow sea. While this was happening, Naruto flowed through his clones to check on things in Westeros. What he found was himself inside Cersei once again. It seemed like they were in a bathhouse of some sort. It was the only area of the city where he could conduct his business and play with Cersei at the same time. The queen had sneaked out of the castle to join Naruto. He had promised her complete reign over the kingdom. It was a great deal, plus the lovemaking was incredible. Jaime couldn't even be in the same ballpark as Naruto. The clones had various ways of prolonging and actually increasing the pleasure. They had stamina for days, while Jaime was only human. What Naruto had forgotten to mention was that she might have to share the kingdom a bit. After all, the other ladies of the court wouldn't mind a piece of this pie. But that was a matter for another time. Naruto picked up where his clone had left off and soon filled Cersei's womb with enough of his seed that she looked 4 months pregnant. Questions arose about where the queen was headed in the middle of the day and night. But those were quickly silenced when they returned to Cersei. She wouldn't let anyone ruin her new favorite thing. Cersei slipped out of him and lay down on the bed, completely exhausted after her marathon session. Naruto had just received his clone's memories. It seemed the hand of the king had died. King Robert had been whoring when the news broke and was now preparing to install a new hand. He had the great idea to appoint his best friend and most loyal vassal, Eddard Stark, to the position. This would be perfect. Now he could gather Catelyn and have her meet Cersei. But on second thought, maybe that's not such a good idea. I'd heard that the Starks and Lannisters didn't like each other very much. Catelyn had been more subdued lately, but that might have had to do with the total beatings she'd taken. Things had escalated in Westeros while he was in Essos. With Daenerys arriving soon, Naruto knew he had to play it cool to truly unite the kingdom. First things first, he had to take care of Joffrey. That boy had evil inside him. It might have something to do with how he was conceived. Cersei had explained how much her brother had meant to her. They had been born twins and did everything together. She had guessed this also included having relations with each other. It wasn't unusual where she was from, but from the union had been born Joffrey. He was a strange and evil boy, with tendencies that included slitting the belly of a pregnant cat to show his father the kittens. He would have to be neutralized if this plan of hers was going to get off the ground. Though she didn't feel entirely right about killing the child, he was a child, after all. Although it sent him into a deep sleep, that was a different matter entirely. He would sleep away from the rebellion, and no one would be the wiser. This would also allow him to avoid Cersei's grief when he united the kingdom. She was a key player in this. Her family's influence with the kingdom and her coffers would allow Naruto to sustain him through the next war. It also helped that she was an incredible lover. The way she could move her body and that tongue was to die for. However, her ambition was something he would have to deal with soon. He could tell she desired him, but it hadn't yet become what he desired most: respect and love. Lust would have to suffice for now, though. The remaining pieces would arrive in the capital soon. Go back to bed, Naruto. I'm coming, Cersei-chan. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. After all, a little sleep never hurt anyone. Cersei didn't seem too sleepy to him, though. Chapter 4. The trek north to Winterfell wasn't the most fun for Robert. The cold was biting, and the women were ill-equipped to combat the chill. If Cersei hadn't been such a vixen, he would have slept with her. He knew she was one of the most beautiful women in Westeros. Unfortunately, that mouth and attitude didn't help matters. Though he was noticing that she seemed younger and happier lately. It must have been all that warm weather in King's Landing, because it certainly wasn't her cheerful disposition. What Robert didn't know was that Naruto was slowly feeding Cersei his chakra, the only way Cersei wanted it. His seed was imbued with healing properties and actually made the women he slept with look younger if they weren't in their prime. Cersei chronologically regressed to her 20s. She'd felt the difference in her body, but she'd assumed it was due to her constant love for Naruto. She felt so much more alive and energetic, plus all the constant attention was a welcome relief from the beast known as Robert. She hadn't felt this love since Jaime had professed it to her, but he had been her brother and twin. Naruto seemed to exude love and lust for her whenever he was around. She had stopped all conjugal visits with Jaime, which hadn't gone down well with the King's Guard. He had asked why, and Cersei had reasoned with him to stop until they could kill the king. What she didn't know was that Naruto was her lover now, and she wouldn't allow him to leave her because of Jaime. She still cared for Jaime, but now it was a more sisterly kind of affection. Besides, how could she keep up with Jaime when Naruto tired her out every day? They were riding in their own private carriage. The bumpy ride wasn't the only thing bumpy about their vehicle. Naruto was pounding her from behind and really getting into it. He was grabbing her ass and slapping it as well. He was keeping her quiet with another clone in her mouth, but she was still screaming in pleasure. If anyone had been close enough to the carriage, they might have gotten suspicious. Fortunately for Cersei, she had left explicit instructions not to disturb her. They were rocking the carriage back and forth. Naruto was really going at it with abandon. With him spit roasting her, Cersei's mind was going blank with pleasure. She just moaned around Naruto, but he wasn't even remotely close to being satisfied. Grabbing her breasts and bringing them together so they wrapped around him so warmly, Naruto pumped in and out of her sweet mounds. Being thoroughly bucked from 3 angles, Cersei didn't see the last Naruto come from behind for her bubbly, quivering ass. He pumped in and out while pounding and grinding into her juicy ass. The truly amazing thing about all of this, aside from the whole clone problem, was that they were doing all of this on top of the carriage. With his chakra, Naruto was suspending them all from above and giving a big middle finger to gravity. He'd always wanted to do Cersei in midair. She was fainting from the pleasure, and because all she could smell was Naruto. She was gasping for breath. It was exhausting work, and the lovemaking was intense when Naruto actually used his sheath. By the time the king's retinue arrived at Winterfell, Naruto had ridden Cersei like a fool. He wouldn't be coherent for at least a couple of hours, but the king wanted to meet with Edith soon. The procession entered Winterfell, and Robert made a great show of examining Eddard and proclaiming him fat. The Warden of the North smiled at the king, and the two departed for the final resting place of Robert's love. While this was happening, Naruto was trying to make Cersei presentable, but that was going to be impossible. "Cersei? Are you all right there? The fat oaf has gone to pay his respects to his wench. Do you need help?" Jaime was worried about his twin. She was becoming reclusive. She wouldn't allow him to ride alongside the carriage with her, and barred him from her bedchamber. If he didn't know better, he would have believed she was still sleeping with Robert. Waking from her stupor, Cersei saw Naruto pointing at the carriage door. "I'm fine, just a little under the weather. Go ahead, Jaime, I'll be right out." Nodding, Jaime wanted to check on her, but not in front of the Starks. With Jaime out of the way, Cersei did her best to gather what she could of her clothes. Unfortunately, Naruto had ruined them so badly with his seed that it took her a few licks to enjoy the seed. She wouldn't let it go to waste. Shaking his head at the scene, Naruto formed some hand seals and used a Huton Jutsu to wash the queen. Mixing Akatsuki and Futon Jutsu, Naruto slowly warmed her clothes and body. Though her expression told him she wasn't happy with the cold shower. Smirking at the beauty, Naruto lightly slapped her with his flesh and she opened her mouth wide. He rode her face for a few minutes while her clothes and body dried. With a grunt of ecstasy, he filled her stomach with his seed and her mouth tried to hold back the flood. She was painted white once more, growling at her teenage lover. Cersei still continued to clean the rest with her fingers. Licking each finger clean, she loved Naruto's taste. With a final loving touch, Naruto dressed as well, wiping his cheek a little. Smiling at the look he gave her, Cersei finished cleaning herself and looked somewhat presentable. Though the wrinkled dress didn't help much. With a triumphant smile on his face, Naruto disappeared from the carriage and flowed towards his other clone who was watching the procession from afar. He could see Cersei getting out of her carriage, looking a little worse for wear. He walked over to Caitlyn, who seemed equally nervous, as it had been one of her morning clone rituals. He had memories of examining her wares in her bedchamber, and the bathroom adjacent to the master's. She had tried to look presentable, but he could see a few white streaks on her neck and in her hair. Not all of his seed was eliminated from their lovemaking. When the two met to greet each other, both were a little embarrassed by their appearance. But they soon caught Naruto's scent on both of them. Shocked by the news that Naruto had also caught the Stark matriarch, Cersei searched for the teenager in the castle. Cersei wasn't happy. Not only had Naruto left her to fend for herself on her own, but he'd also been spreading his seed to others. She thought she was the only one, but by Caitlyn's newly bucked up set, she wasn't the only one testing the blonde-haired ninja. Your Majesty, it is a pleasure to see you. You too, Caitlyn. I hope your husband is well. I mean, if you had seen him over the past 2 days. Caitlyn blushed at the accusation, but knew she couldn't deny it. She had also caught Naruto's distinct scent on Cersei. He's fine, thank you for asking. She wouldn't be reprimanded in front of her children. These are my children. Rob, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon. Cersei glanced casually at the children, but did a double take when she discovered the beauty of her 2 daughters. They were beautiful, and Sansa had truly filled out. The 2 girls must have been 18 and 15, respectively. Cersei knew Naruto would enjoy them too soon. That son of a hitch, knowing I was giving myself to him, and he still had the audacity to sleep with this wench. Cersei was livid and would truly take out her wrath on the teenage hero. Sensing Cersei's wrath, Naruto knew he had to nip this in the bud sooner rather than later. You probably should have told Kit. I know, but the reaction was too good to pass up. Do you have some weird death wish or something, Kit? Laughing at the statement, Naruto continued to watch as the 2 women were openly polite to each other, but their words were cutting. Without Naruto there to act as a mediator, it looked like this confrontation would soon turn ugly. Sighing to himself, Naruto ran up to the group and snuck in behind them all. It is wonderful to finally meet your Majesty. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I am a guest of the Starks. Incensed by the teen, Cersei knew she couldn't cause a scene here. She was seething inside. It is a pleasure to meet you, Sir Uzumaki. Yeah, where have you been, Naruto? I thought you were going to meet the king and queen? I was otherwise occupied, dear Bran, but I see you've climbed the tower again. What? No, I wasn't there. Shaking his head at the obvious lie, Naruto took the small stone from Bran's lapel. Smiling guiltily, Bran didn't meet his mother's eyes. He knew she didn't want him to climb the tower. It's quite chilly in here, might I suggest we retire to the common room? Nodding stiffly at the suggestion, the royal court entered the great halls of Winterfell. Inside the doors it was much warmer, and Cersei could smell the aroma of great cuts of meat roasting and open fires. With the warmth and the scent calming her, Cersei could now think logically about what had happened. She'd believed herself to be alone in her affection for the teenager, but it seemed he was playing more than most. Who knew how many women in the kingdom he'd snatched up? She'd have to be more careful with the teenager. Sensing the queen's inner turmoil, Naruto indicated to Caitlyn that he would speak with the queen privately. Caitlyn was also unhappy with the situation. Naruto hadn't said they were mutually exclusive, but she had assumed from his profession of love that he would be hers. What have I done? I can't believe I cheated on Eddard with Naruto. Now he has the queen too? It seemed Naruto would have to do some damage control, and fast, otherwise this plan of his would soon go to hell. With the silence that was common in his profession, Naruto had sneaked up on the queen and quietly led her to a more secluded area of the castle. What do you think you're doing, Naruto? I can't believe I trusted you. You used me. Cersei wouldn't be denied her voice to speak out against the teen. Naruto knew he had to get this under control quickly. He touched the queen gently and allowed his chakra to flow through her. He increased the flow to incapacitate her with pleasure. Each pulse of chakra was causing countless amounts of release in the queen. Soon she was a quivering mess on the floor. Now better suited to his brand of persuasion, Naruto carried her to his chambers. He would have to furiously pound the truth into her about how he wanted to save the kingdom and build his clan anew. He would take several wives, and she would be one of the first. But she wouldn't be the last. He regretted that she had felt used, but he needed her and her wealth. She wouldn't be left out of his endeavor. But she was going to be one of his wives, not the only one. She would rule the kingdom with her sister wives. This included Caitlyn and perhaps her daughters when Naruto got around to it. While Cersei tried to argue with the blonde, he continued to show her why he was the best lover she'd ever had. He wouldn't let her forget it. She would really have to break their argument with pleasure. She didn't mind in the slightest. Soon, her mind was aglow with sensation. Now she could approach Caitlyn. Flowing toward the numerous spies he had left behind in Winterfell, he caught Caitlyn standing idly by the window overlooking the courtyard. Again, with a touch of his chakra, she was in the same boat as Cersei. With Caitlyn out like a light, Naruto carried her to her chamber as well. All this was done without alerting any of the guards or husbands. It was good to be a ninja. Entering her room, Naruto found Cersei servicing her clone and being reamed in her ass by another. She was sucking like a drug, her eyes glazed with pleasure and his seed. He was beyond hopeless for any coherent thought or argument about seeing Caitlyn here as well. With a mild shock to her system, Caitlyn awoke from her pleasure-induced sleep and saw Cersei being reamed and rammed all over the room. She was licking two of the clones. It was a sight to behold, the queen of the realms taken like this. She lacked all modesty, sucking and licking lazily. Caitlyn felt a surge of pride at not looking like this well. That was until Naruto began caressing her rear and breast with his celestial touch. It felt like magic as he gently massaged it, generating small amounts of right-on energy to stimulate Caitlyn. Soon she was moaning and groaning like Cersei. She also began grabbing the clones, and they were all only too happy to oblige. Stripping the lady of the house, the clones soon had her on all fours. They were double-teaming her from behind while another used her mouth as a vacuum. She was sucking and bucking, just like before she'd found out about Cersei. With the two noble ladies preoccupied, they didn't notice when they were both pierced into each other. With their bodies rubbing against each other, Naruto wanted them to truly feel why they were so jealous. The blonde and brunette were horrified by the sudden turn of events, but the clones kept drilling into them. Rubbing them against each other again and again, the stimulation was too much, and soon they both slammed into each other. Turning them so they were facing each other's lower lips, Naruto gently pushed them so they ran their tongues over each other's wet lips. Soon they were serving each other, and drinking all the seed Naruto and his clones had spilled into them. It was a far cry from what had happened before. Both women knew they were being manipulated by the teen, but they weren't worried at all as long as their minds were filled with such pleasure. With their mouths occupied, Naruto and his clones joined the women and really got into each other's mouths. Licking each other's and Naruto's combined juices was enough to make Naruto fill them up again. Licking up the liquid, they were soon filled with protein, and their bellies were as big as if they were 4 months pregnant. They had missed the banquet, but they had eaten a lot. The food was rich in protein and Naruto's unique chakra. It continued to work wonders on both of their bodies, combating the signs of aging and even reversing its effects. Naruto lifted the duo and separated them, but allowed the other to see their most private areas. Bouncing on his lap, Naruto could see his cream flowing freely from their respective holes. They continued to moan from the treatment, and lost themselves in the sensations. Holding their hips, Naruto thrust fiercely, causing both of them to scream in orgasmic pleasure. Their breasts bounced in the air, and the wild expressions on their faces. Leaning back, Naruto gained a new angle on the women and thrust accordingly, his hands kneading their perky, juicy mounds. He modified his tips so they were moaning with unbridled lust, and he also marveled at the way he could see himself thrusting in and out of the women. Everything soon came to a head as both women clenched their inner thighs and squirted juice all over Naruto. With the added pleasure, Naruto filled their stomachs once more and pulled out to allow the rest to spray over their chests and faces. Lathering the cream all over their faces, Naruto and the clones massaged the cream all over their faces with their flesh, smearing it all over their hair as well. It wasn't something the two women were proud of being seen doing. Unfortunately for both of them, they could hear the two Stark girls arguing. They could be heard through the door. It seemed the two were having an argument and decided to seek advice from their resident guest. When the two opened the door to the room, they were assaulted by the acrid scent of the ladies making love. Naruto stood over Caitlyn and Cersei's heads, the two women covered from head to toe in his seed. The two girls were still in shock, unable to believe the situation they had gotten themselves into. So, can I explain this? Naruto was at a loss for how best to explain why he had Caitlyn and Cersei's lips wrapped around him. This wasn't how he wanted to introduce the girls to the more adult things in the world. Chapter 5. Thinking quickly on his feet, Naruto created 2 additional clones and had the girls put to sleep. He was amazed by his quick thinking because he was still being attended to by the Queen and Caitlyn respectively. Grabbing their heads in his hands, he forced himself into their waiting mouths, slamming with bestial force that drove their noses into his pelvis. All they could smell was his seed and their combined juices. The women were truly and completely buck senseless. They had lost all sense of decorum or anger with the teenager. As long as he continued to screw them over, and they agreed to anything he did, Naruto could truly be called the master negotiator, at least with the opposite sex. With other matters to deal with, Naruto conjured more clones for the 2 worthy women to play with. Escorting the 2 teenagers to their room, Naruto found a young maid along the way. Her name was Jane Poole, one of the minor lord's daughters, a flighty thing but talented in the beauty department. Seen carrying the 2 daughters of her feudal lord's household, Naruto knew he would have to carry her as well. While that wasn't entirely unwelcome, the teenage servant was a year older than Sansa and would be an excellent addition to his services. Taking the surprised teen in his arms, Naruto continued toward the young Stark's room. Placing the 2 daughters in their respective beds, Naruto had a different plan for the little lord's daughter. Once again, Raiden's energy charged through her fingertips, causing the girl to moisten her lower lips. She was eager to begin. She had seen Stark's guest wander the halls during the day and was amazed by his handsome features, as well as the fierce way he glared at her from time to time. She moaned with pleasure from the way he caressed her, climaxing after only a few seconds of his wonderful fingers. Licking her juices from his fingers, Naruto liked the taste. He knew if he mated this girl, she would be his forever, though that could be said of his entire family. Having her lay on the bed, Naruto lowered his head and licked her delicate bud. She was in heaven, and her cries were enough to shake his walls. They were piercing with pleasure, and the need for Naruto to take her virginity. Naruto could tell Jane needed him, but he wanted her first time to be memorable, so he took her to new heights of pleasure. His tongue lashed at her, and she rocked with it. He was playing a game of how long it would take her to beg for him. She was close to it. She couldn't fathom the sensations Naruto was giving her. She wanted him so badly, she begged with her eyes as her mouth was busy moaning and screaming in pleasure. He allowed her to climax in his mouth and licked her sweet nectar, but he had underestimated the young woman. She didn't just want him in her, she wanted to taste him. Getting on her knees, she tore off his pants and freed him from the restrictive clothing. Her first glimpse of him was shocking to say the least. She didn't think he could fit her, let alone her mouth. But she went ahead, licked the underside, and tasted the presentation on him. It was bitter but not too bitter, and she wanted more. She kissed the top of his head, licking and sucking slowly to get used to the size. Swirling her tongue around his shaft and massaging his balls, she was quite skilled for someone who had never done this before. The way things were going, Naruto soon gave her what she wanted, an explosion in her mouth, and she couldn't fight the deluge of cream that spurted out. Soon, most of it was in her hair and face, while Naruto painted her clothes white with his essence. Coughing slightly from the sudden liquid, Jane got to work licking the remainder that covered her face and body. Watching the young teen clean herself up, Naruto helped the beauty out of her skimpy clothes. She was as open as the day she was born, and what a sight she was to behold. She had curves in all the right places, her caboose just the right size. He would enjoy devouring her. Bending at the waist, Jane allowed Naruto to see her most intimate area. He wasn't the least bit surprised to see it wet and ready for what was to come. With her bent like this, Naruto took her from behind and slowly entered her entrance. She tried to stifle her cries of pain, but Naruto stroked her back soothingly as he continued to invade her. With one final thrust, he was inside her, and had ripped her maidenhood open. Her scream would have pierced the heavens if not for the clone silencing her with his mouth. The awkward angle of their lovemaking was strange, to say the least, but it ensured Naruto could feel every bit of Jane. He began massaging and groping her juicy ass. She was well endowed here as well. It was like plowing into a fleshy marshmallow. She was still screaming into the clones' mouths, but now they were turning into screams of pleasure. With a nod, Naruto signaled the clone to straighten the teen. With her back to the original and her mouth occupied with the clone, Jane was lost in a sea of lust and unbridled pleasure. She hadn't expected her first time to be with a foreigner, or how pleasurable it turned out to be. She was glad she'd stayed in Winterfell with Sansa. Guiding her to the bed, Naruto dismissed the clone and pulled out of Jane as he turned her towards him. She was disappointed by the loss of Naruto's warmth, but it was soon replaced and Naruto was truly able to thrust into her. Riding her with abandon now, Naruto silenced her cries of pleasure as he kneaded her perky breast. She was smaller than Cersei or Caitlyn, but she was still a handful and very flexible. Panting from the rough treatment, Jane soon climaxed again and again from the friction caused by their bodies colliding. She could feel her juices lubricating her entrance for Naruto. He was close, and her continued clenching around him was enough for him to paint her insides with his essence. She could see her stomach swelling with the amount of seed Naruto was pumping into her. She had never felt so full in her entire life. She was climaxing with him, and soon their juices were mixing together. Her tongue was lolling out, and her face twisted stupidly. It was a normal appearance after an encounter with the blonde hero. With an audible pop, Naruto released the teen, and she slid into the combined juices of their lovemaking. It was literally spurting out of her. Covered in white, it was a pleasing look to Jane. But the makeup wasn't complete. Naruto crawled up to her face and thrust into her luscious lips. He wanted to really paint her white all over. She was moaning around him but gave no other sign that she was aware for the world to see. He didn't care. His mouth did most of the work. He just continued to use her with unbridled lust. He could feel his next release imminent, and with a mighty roar released into the mouth and face of the bucked girl. He was coating her hair and face in his essence. It looked like cream frosting and stuck to whatever he coated. Splashing it all over her, he painted her tense stomach and perky chest with the rest. She was meowing like a kitten by the time he finished. While all this was happening, Sansa had woken up from her forced nap. It was a shock to see one of her best friends wrapped up in Naruto. She hadn't known her family's guest had so much freedom in the house. He had slept with her mother, the Queen of Westeros, and it seemed like he was sleeping with the person he liked. Naruto hadn't been negligent in noticing Sansa had woken from her slumber, but he was surprised that she didn't stop the total dismantling of his best friend. Though judging by the scent emanating from Sansa, perhaps she wanted in on the action? Be careful, Kit, you don't know how Caitlyn will react once you add Sansa and Arya to our family. I'm sure she'll be fine, given what Caitlyn's doing right now. In the guest room, Caitlyn and Cersei were still being drilled into the kingdom, literally running all over the floor. It was a mess, and the women wouldn't have it any other way. Tongues lolled out of their mouths to catch anything Naruto threw at them, and their eyes were completely white as they rolled in the back of their heads. Painted from head to toe in white, they were loving every minute of it. It was safe to say the two wouldn't object much to what was happening in the girls' bedroom. Back to Sansa, she wasn't sure when it happened, but the intoxicating scent of her best friend's juices and the blonde foxes combined was warming her. It originated in her loins and slowly spread through her body. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked shyly at the blonde man thrusting in and out of Jane's mouth. Naruto was smiling at the smell and created a clone to entertain Jane as he slowly walked towards the supposedly sleeping teen. Hey Sansa, do you like what you see? Sansa shyly stole glances at the clone and Jane, then nodded demurely. Laughing loudly, Naruto cradled the redhead in his arms as he rocked her against his body. The feel of his muscles and the way they molded to her made Sansa feel warmer and warmer as time went on. Soon she was mewing like Jane had and hugging the blonde with her own kind of fervor. Naruto made Sansa taste a bit of Jane's essence, licking her best friend wasn't how Sansa had hoped her day would go. Though the taste wasn't the only thing that made Sansa yearn for Naruto, his body moving against hers caused all sorts of wonderful sensations. She soon grew accustomed to the taste and licked, while Jane was under the double assault of the clone and her best friend. Naruto had slowly begun to strip Sansa of her outer garments, and it really showed off the young teenager's wonderful body. With her noble body on display, Naruto could appreciate where she got her godlike gaze from. She was almost a spitting image of her mother, though her crimson locks were much brighter than her mother Caitlyn's auburn hair. He stroked her soft, silky mane as she continued to lick her best friend's face. Soon the two friends were kissing openly. Jane had always wanted to hug her best friend, had seen Sansa's beauty firsthand whenever they played the handsome prince and the damsel in distress. She had always been the one running after Sansa and trying to win her hand or fight imaginary monsters to save the day. It just didn't seem right for her to be the princess when she had always seen Sansa as just that. Now the two were really getting into it, Naruto just sitting back and watching the spectacle unfold. His clone was still pounding Jane, but his lips were occupied with Sansa's. His moans were muffled by the young redhead's luscious lips. All of this was happening, and it was hard to believe that Arya hadn't woken up because of it. She'd woken up to see her sister and her best friend hugging in a way that wasn't the least bit friendly. "Enjoying the show, Arya-chan?" Startled by the sudden voice at her shoulder, Arya didn't notice the ninja sneaking up behind her. What's Sansa doing, Naruto?" "Oh, she's just entertaining Jane. Do you want to try it?" "What? No. I mean, who would like that?" "You're saying that, but I can smell your lips from here. And I'm not talking about the ones on your face." Shocked by Naruto's bluntness, Arya had the decency to blush at the accusation. She tried to slap the blonde teen but was stopped by his much stronger arms. Now, I didn't mean to take offense by it. I was just conveying the truth, wasn't I, my little wolf?" Smiling at the nickname Naruto had given her, Arya stopped struggling for a bit and continued watching the two friends fight each other while Naruto's clone struck behind Jane. It looked like it was going to be a long night for the trio of young girls. Chapter 6. The continuous spectacle before her made Arya eager to participate, but she didn't want to appear wanton. Fortunately, Naruto could tell that Arya was in a good mood for future activities. She had grown into a beautiful woman, her first bloom having been only a couple of years ago. The years had only increased her affection for the teenager. Massaging her slowly, Naruto was really warming up under the necks of the trio in front of him. Although his clone was doing his thing with Jane, she didn't seem to mind the treatment, at least from her screaming mouth muffled by Sansa. Sansa was in heaven. Her best friend was munching on her most intimate areas. It seemed Jane was a natural rug muncher. She took to it like a duck to water, grinding her friend's face over and over again was intoxicating for Sansa. Using her friend wantonly and having Arya watch it all was a fantasy she couldn't have imagined. But she was getting impatient because Naruto hadn't made the move to relieve himself inside her either. From the moans reaching her nether lips, Sansa could tell a ride with Naruto would be a lot of fun. Grabbing Jane's hair and crushing his face against her nether lips, Sansa gestured for Naruto to fill her as well. The crimson-haired vixen was as commanding as her mother. She knew what she wanted, and she wanted it now. Not one to ignore a woman in need, Naruto conjured numerous clones to entertain the rest of the girls and walked over to the couple in bed. The new clones took their places and began stripping Arya of her clothes. At first, she was anxious, but soon became involved due to her older sister being in the room. If Sansa could do it, she wouldn't be the one left out of all the action. The Stark girls were to be initiated into the tradition their mother had endured. It was one thing to lose your maidenhead, but a completely different animal to lose it to Naruto Uzumaki. He would truly show them the meaning of lovemaking, the best way to make them scream for days or weeks. However, he thought it best to last only one night, because the girls would need to rest on the journey south to the capital. Arya was experiencing some of the best sensations she had ever felt in her life, the doppelgangers infusing their fingers with lightning chakra and giving her an incredible massage. When they reached her lower lips, she climaxed immediately from the stimulation. Dripping with nectar, they were more than willing to drink it, licking the young teen clean, the clones also initiated a deep kiss. She was being ravaged from both top and bottom, the clones surrounding the teen and taking positions to truly distract her until Naruto finished off Sansa and Jane. Sansa was swept away into her own world when Naruto began massaging her supple body like he did with Arya. She thought the things Jane was doing were incredible, but Naruto blew her away. Every touch of his fingers made her moan in pleasure and a little pain. He was fondling her perky ass and groping her juicy breast. Each act was more sensual than the next, but when he started grinding his body into her, that's when she lost it, creaming herself all over Jane's face. Like the little soldier she was, Jane licked and tried to swallow Sansa's load. Unfortunately, her eyes were rolling into the back of her head from the pounding she was taking at the hands of the clones behind her. They were abusing both of her holes and using them in the most wanton ways imaginable. Soon she was creaming herself, all over the clones, and they weren't far from filling her to the brim with Naruto's seed. With Jane out of the equation, Naruto signaled his other clones to congregate around Sansa. They moved toward the redhead and really began to work their magic on the teen. Deciding this should be a family matter, Naruto gestured for Arya to join her sister. Now that he had them facing each other, he believed what happened earlier was a good idea to have happen again. Pushing the two together, Naruto pressed his body behind them as he slowly slid them against each other. With the light touches of his fingertips, the two were in a world of ecstasy. Rubbing their noble bodies against each other, Sansa and Arya had never felt this close before. Their previous arguments were light years away when they literally rubbed against each other with their nether lips touching. Naruto rubbed their sensitive regions to really get them going, and they began to squirt against each other. That was more than enough lubrication for Naruto, and he slowly invaded them from behind. With a smothered scream and a moan that were eerily similar, both Sansa and Arya had lost their virginity at the same time to the same man. It was a sight to see and a story to tell their children when they were older. Though perhaps the juicy details would have to wait until their children were much, much older. Seeing the fatigue in Sansa's body, Naruto had her lie on top of him while he lay on the bed. With Arya on top of her and her clone behind Arya, it was a stark sandwich with Naruto as the bread. He would give them a cream filling to remember soon. With Naruto rubbing himself inside them and their bodies rubbing together on the outside, it was no surprise when they climaxed once again and eased Naruto's entry into their bodies. Pumping in and out of the girls, Naruto soon built a rhythm with their bodies, the friction against their lips torturous for the girls. They hadn't known there could be so much pleasure in this world, after all the cold and ice that permeated the north. It was getting very hot in their bodies now. Naruto pumping into them was causing countless wonderful sensations, but the hardest part was yet to come. Naruto hadn't taken her virginity yet. He'd only been riding her buds for a while. Now he'd have to break them. This would cause Arya quite a bit of pain, and maybe a little less for Sansa. He'd purposefully engaged in the pleasurable acts first to numb her senses for what was to come. With a nod, Naruto signaled the clone to carry Arya over and lay her down on the clone's body. Just as Naruto was lying on the bed, the two were now side by side. Flipping them over, both Naruto and the clone began kissing the two teens and distracting them a bit for the next part. With a gesture, both Naruto and the clone dove into the girls, breaking their maidenhood. Their screams were muffled by the two blonde mouths. Kissing the teens had distracted them, but the action didn't go unnoticed. Waiting for a while for the two to get used to his girth, Naruto and his doppelganger simply held the two Starks while they cried a little. After a couple of minutes, Naruto continued slowly thrusting in and out of Sansa and Arya. They moaned in obvious discomfort and pain, but it soon gave way to a pleasurable sensation. Arya had never felt so full in her entire life, and the same could be said for Sansa. They both looked at each other and expressed their pleasure. If Naruto were to compare the teens to his mother, he'd say they were much tighter and smaller. But the feeling of their bodies contouring around him was very similar, though Caitlyn really held the reins in the breast department. With their moans turning into gasps of pleasure, Naruto was able to pick up his pace and ride the girls a little. Pumping in and out, was intoxicating for the young ninja. He could feel every muscle in his buds gripping him tightly. Upon awakening from her stupor, Jane discovered her best friend and sister being explored and mounted by the teenage heartthrob. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't the only one who noticed her eyes widen. The two clones tasked with entertaining her were more than ready to continue. Positioning themselves in front and behind her, they easily slide in once more and begin the cycle all over again. Seeing this before him, Naruto decided he would have all the women of House Stark. Touching a seal on his arm, Naruto signaled the clones pleasing Caitlyn and Cersei to gather in the girls' chamber. Having previously drawn the necessary seals for instant transport, it was child's play to warp the two to where the original had been. The funny thing was the way the two women arrived, still attached to their clones respectively. They were both being roasted by the clones left behind and had climaxed numerous times. Their eyes rolled back and they were lost in a world of pleasure. Their asses were filled with their seed, as were their bellies. The clones continued pumping in and out of their sloshing holes. Both girls were aware of their mother, but the feeling wasn't mutual for Caitlyn. That was resolved with a quick slap on the backside that snapped her out of her stupor. Screaming around Naruto, Caitlyn couldn't believe Naruto had claimed her daughters as well. It was fun watching Caitlyn try to make an angry face with her mouth full of him. Watching her face and pumping in and out of him was hilarious. Her range of emotions flew from anger to pleasure, to anger again. It was enough to make Naruto release into her mouth once more, because even though she was outraged by the blonde's actions, she wouldn't think of biting him. Released into his mother's mouth, Naruto could see the girl's eyes glazed over with lust at the action. They had seen a bit of his mother's unbridled lust on display when they entered Naruto's room, but it was something else entirely to see it now. His mother gallantly tried to maintain some dignity, as she slurped and swallowed as much milk as she could down her esophagus. Cersei wasn't much better, humping Naruto as she slurped him down her throat. Thankfully, her daughter wasn't here to see the face she was making as the blonde teen pounded her. When one clone finished in her mouth, another took its place like an endless cycle of cream-filled treats. She wasn't one to complain when she could have all she wanted of her new favorite drink. The arbor wine didn't have the creamier flavor she craved, nor did it quell her hunger as well as Naruto's seed. Sensing the tension in the room and the lust, Naruto decided to have one last show for the road. It wouldn't be right to keep the ladies up all night when they had an early start the next morning in King's Landing. Gathering the 5 women to the room's main bed, Naruto had them all facing each other in a lust-filled circle. Each could touch the other, and so they did, the daughters playing with their mother while Jane marveled at the queen's assets. Pumping in and out of each other's rosebuds, Naruto truly gave new meaning to the bonding phase. With the women almost finished, Naruto increased his pace and created a ride that was synchronized with all the women. They were bouncing up and down on him, so many round, delicious globes bouncing up and down, up and down. Each woman came at a different time, but they all finished in less than 5 minutes. Soaking the sheets beneath them and making the maids' work really a living nightmare the next day. With the combined power of their thighs and lips, Naruto roared incoherently with pleasure and pumped them to the brim with his seed. It leaked from their very swollen lips and combined with their juices beneath. But he wasn't completely exhausted. Milking the women, he showered them with the rest of the convenient circle he'd had them create. Each pump splashed against the women and girls, drenching their bodies with his seed and splattering their faces as well. Caitlyn and Cersei were both tired of this, but the girls were slightly shocked by the amount. They opened their mouths to express their surprise when more came to occupy their tongues. With a final flourish, Naruto released the women to lie in the pools of juice, reveling in the feeling of utter depravity knowing that the combined juices of his own and Naruto's release were spreading all over their nubile bodies. With a final order for his clones to snuggle up with the 5 women, Naruto left the room and headed to his own bedroom. But before he could get a good night's rest, he placed a seal on the door that would make it impossible for anyone to open it or speak through it unless Naruto explicitly authorized it. He didn't want either Robert or Ned to find their mate covered in another man's seed, and besides, the shock might give Ned a heart attack upon learning that the same man had slept with his 2 innocent, pliable daughters. Laughing in a slightly perverted tone, Naruto headed to bed, knowing what the capital would bring him in terms of entertainment. Chapter 7. Arriving at the famous city of King's Landing, Naruto and company didn't see what all the fuss was about. It was a squalid city with filth and all the makings of a depraved and completely neglected underclass. The upper crust had taken everything they could and left small morsels for the poor and oppressed. The group Naruto had brought from across the narrow sea was a little worse for wear, but thankfully the capital hadn't seen their motley group of ships. The fog covering the ships might have had something to do with that. Some swayed unjutsu did wonders to cover their tracks. The harbor patrol and the fishermen were a little surprised to see so many boats docked at their pier, but they couldn't do anything about it. Especially with the first salvo of the Unsullied, and their blank stares disconcerting the local population. Now that they had arrived, it was a matter of finding suitable lodging for Daenerys and Missandei. The Unsullied didn't need the most luxurious accommodations, but it wouldn't keep them in the mud either. Robbing local nobles had allowed Naruto to shelter his men and the future queen of Westeros. Walking through the streets, Daenerys was horrified by the living conditions of the poorest people of Westeros. Even in the legendary city, there was no end to the injustice and poverty that had plagued the rest of the country. The only two women aboard the ships had established a bit of a rapport with each other, stemming from the ease with which they could speak to each other. Missandei had known so many different languages, but High Valyrian was the one the masters had used the most. Daenerys had spoken it since birth and seemed equally adept at the tongue. They had talked about their lives and what was to come. Missandei had also mentioned her supposed savior Naruto. "What do you think of him, Your Excellency?" "There's no need for such formality, Missandei. Daenerys is fine." "That can't be true, Your Grace, as you will be the new queen of all Westeros." Shaking her head at the statement, Daenerys knew that was the case, but she still wanted to befriend the only other woman who had shown her such affection. "That's fine then, but you don't like curtsying?" Laughing at the woman's eccentric attitude, Missandei nodded nonetheless. "But you still haven't answered the question, Your Grace." "I believe it will foster good relations between the houses and honor your agreement with me." "That was too formal. What do you think of the man himself?" A little embarrassed by the intimate question, Daenerys answered anyway. "He is a good man and will bring much joy to whomever he marries. He is honorable and just, whether to slaves or free men." Deciding that was the only answer she would get from her queen, Missandei left it at that. Finally arriving at their destination, the two women were shocked by the opulence compared to the pier and their walk through Flea Bottom. The nobles really had the nerve to display their wealth in front of the less fortunate. Upon entering the house, they were greeted by their savior, who had taken the house from some disgusting nobleman. Although his wife had been someone he had entertained for the past 2 weeks. "Welcome, Your Grace and Missandei, to your new home. This will be our home until I can finalize our undertakings throughout the city." The way he concluded filled both women with unease. They had seen firsthand how ruthless the blonde could be when he wanted to finalize something. The luxurious house was a sight to behold, from the marble scattered throughout to the satin sheets. It was a wonder the place wasn't ransacked by thieves daily. Posting the Unsullied all over the city had been one of the best ideas Naruto had ever come up with, though he had to quietly lure the city watch away from the seedier parts of the city. A few golden dragons had bought him the much-needed space to build his budding empire. He would clean up Flea Bottom and from there take the country by storm. If he could rally the common people, the rest would follow. Though that was for another time, for now, he had his beautiful queen and the always dazzling Missandei to attend to. "This is beautiful, Naruto, but how could you afford this?" "One of the nobles had a sale on the estate. I bought it by steal." From the Cheshire grin on his face, Daenerys had an idea of the methods the blonde had used. The journey across the narrow sea had been arduous and terrifying, but now Daenerys was finally back in the city of her birth. Missandei had never passed the city gates, but now she was on the other side of the narrow sea in a world she had no idea how to process. It was terrifying for the young woman, but she trusted the blonde and trusted that he had her best interests at heart. Though judging by the banging upstairs, they weren't the only ones staying in this house. "What's that noise upstairs, Naruto?" Blushing slightly, Naruto had the decency to look a little guilty. "Oh, just friends entertaining each other. Nothing to worry too much about, I'll be sure to tell them not to." Nodding, the two women settled into the house and soon drifted off to a dreamless sleep. Gesturing to the Unsullied stationed around the house, Naruto asked them to make the rounds and ensure that no strangers disturbed the two women. The Unsullied would not be well suited to fit into the city, but Naruto had gathered the necessary disguises for the soldiers to flit around the city without attracting too much attention. Deciding to check on his friends upstairs, Naruto found the lady of the house on her knees being double-bucked by her clones. While another filled her mouth and stomach with enough seed to make her look 3 months pregnant, the original gestured for the clones to unload, and they released their final loads into the woman. Gasping for breath from the momentous bucking, the woman looked up at the blonde in the room. When she had first gone to meet the family 2 weeks ago, the woman had no idea this would happen. Her husband had laughed at the absurdity of the teen's request, the living arrangements for the teen, and so on. That laughter quickly turned to pain when Naruto showed his gifts to the man of the house. She didn't know where her husband was now, only that he had been forcibly dragged through the shadows. With her husband out of the picture, the lady of the house had believed she too would be summarily attended to. But the teenager had only asked her to stay in one section of the enormous house while he prepared for his friend's arrival. The teenager had been a gentleman and conversed cordially with her throughout the ordeal, always emphasizing the importance of his mission in this city. They dined together and soon came to understand each other more intimately. She hadn't married her husband with any notion of love or fidelity. The wretch had toyed with her and then moved on to sporting all the young girls he could get his hands on. She knew his flirtations would one day lead to a reckoning with the upper-level nobility, but she hadn't foreseen the blonde in all of this. Once the blonde man known as Naruto had invited the woman to his bed, she had accepted, knowing she could turn this around. Unfortunately for the woman of the house, Naruto would once again showcase his gifts, but this time in the bedroom. The amount of pleasure she had experienced was enough to leave her in a drunken stupor for much of the fortnight. Even now, as she lay on her prostate waiting for the blonde to continue making love, Naruto sighed good-humoredly and shed his outer clothing to engage in another round of jealousy in the bedroom. Many hours later, Naruto freed himself from the young woman's arms and gathered his clothes. His plans would have to begin immediately. No one else in this game would take him by surprise. With most of the city's residents still asleep, Naruto and the Unsullied tore out the most atrocious of the city's filth and made an example of them for the populace. The rapists were scattered about with their nether regions missing to show what would happen to those who laid hands on innocents. While the local thug bosses were taken to the pier and drowned with stones tied to their ankles, Naruto had eliminated most of the criminal elements in Flea Bottom within a couple of hours. The Unsullied had been given lodging at one of the larger inns in the slum. Naruto could see that the population was deeply hungry. All the food had been funneled to the nobility. With the king and queen still at Winterfell, the city had been under the control of Petr Baelish. His brothels had seen a steady influx of noblemen and women. Food in the markets had also gone to the brothels, but it had steadily dwindled to almost nothing. Littlefinger could see another hand at play here, but his little birds had no idea of the sudden turn of events. All they knew was that it was quiet in Flea Bottom, and some new player had taken over the district. Whenever Littlefinger sent a bird to check on the district, they never returned. Petr was getting anxious about the new blood in the game. He couldn't have someone playing so close to his home. Naruto had heard of this Littlefinger, a man of humble beginnings who had risen to a lord and been given the title of Master of Coin. He was a shrewd player in this game, but arrogant and vain, both failures to be trifled with. His little birds had tried to gather information on the blonde, but he had taken them for himself. The man had sent women to gather information. Naruto had taken them, and broken them with his gifts. They sang Baelish's secrets into his ears, all while riding from behind. The lessons he'd learned in intelligence gathering had quickly paid off, and he now had most of the bird names for himself. The new birds Baelish had sent were male, and they were quickly flushed out of the city. He had no qualms about killing the men, but the women and children were another matter. The senses he had refined during the war allowed Naruto to sense the hostility and malice of the people around him. Everyone he sensed was an enemy, and he would either break them to his side or fill them with steel. The final adventure of the day would be to take over one of Baelish's brothels and turn it into a base for himself. By mid-afternoon, the brothel was almost empty, but there were a few nobles languishing among their bedmates. Naruto and company cut down the men in the room and rendered all the women unconscious. Most didn't make a sound when they were captured, but some let out a gurgle before succumbing to the shadows. The first floor had been taken without much trouble, but Naruto knew the upper floors would be filled with guards. Signaling the Unsullied to remove the bodies and take the women to the dormitories, Naruto began his ascent up the stairs. The guards had heard the muffled screams and were on high alert. Unfortunately for them, it didn't matter in the slightest. Naruto used multiple knives to take out the men from a distance. Their armor was pierced without any resistance, and with most of the hallways clear, Naruto performed his favorite jutsu, and numerous copies flooded the halls. Each one was assigned to clear the rooms and slaughter all the men inside. Each room was cleared within minutes, and the original continued on his way to the brothel's main office. This was one of the lesser-known brothels on Baelish's list, but it had been a fruitful one for Coin's master. This establishment would be a crushing blow to the scheming bastard. Naruto had found the main office on the 3rd floor. He was flanked by more guards who were easily dispatched with a few knives. Inside stood the manager of their site, trembling in his gold-adorned boots. He had heard the commotion both downstairs and outside his door. The gurgle of screams was a good indication of the devastation that awaited on the other side. Holding a jewel-encrusted dagger in his left hand, the manager tried to look as fearsome as he could, but when Naruto entered the room, his words died in his throat. That may have been because he now had a knife sticking out of the side of his neck. Flowing through his clones to verify the premise, Naruto found no living threats and all the women were rendered unconscious. The base is secure, boss. Okay, take the rest of the girls and put them in the main lobby. We'll add them to our corps of agents in the capital. With his job done, the original sat down in the chair closest to him. It had taken Naruto less than 2 hours to get rid of the vermin in the brothel. Now he would have the rest of his forces clean up the bodies and prepare to design the base after its new owner. The golden dragons that had been collected from the corpses, and what was once the building's safe numbered in the thousands. Not a bad day for Naruto. Now he would see what Baelish would do, but this was a nice little acquisition for the teen, and not just for the money. He had struck something very valuable to Littlefinger, his sense of security and anonymity within the capital. Now the man knew there was someone who would take what was his and use it against him. Baelish had always thought he was the smartest man in the capital, but there was another willing to play the game as ruthlessly as he was. Too bad for Baelish, Naruto was no ordinary player. He was going to turn this Game of Thrones around. Chapter 8. Petr Baelish was livid. Some nameless men were taking over Flea Bottom, and his brothels were falling one after another. His profits were in drink, and the king was due back in King's Landing within the week. The blow to his finances was enough to make even Tywin Lannister blush. He went from being one of the richest men in the country to half his former self. Those brothels weren't just businesses. They were also where he kept most of his golden dragons. Since most of the men who entered the brothels were only there for one purpose, there was no danger of the gold being lost. Someone had shouted about their plans and they would pay the price, but the anguish they were going through wouldn't end soon. Naruto was chuckling at the pain Baelish was going through. He had consolidated his control in the lower districts, and was quickly raising the man's brothels one by one. It did surprise the young blonde man how many brothels there were in the city. He wondered why there hadn't been a plague in the kingdom of all the spread legs. With his workforce increasing in number, Naruto could fund his conquest of the poorer districts. The continued availability of food and clean water helped him become the most prominent figure in the area. People actually viewed him as some sort of god, with the way they were fed and the precipitous drop in crime. There hadn't been a murder or rape in the district for over 2 weeks. The crime families had fallen silent, and there were no robberies in the plaza. His unsullied soldiers patrolled the streets, and the women he had acquired from the brothels had adapted well to become messengers between Naruto and the men. Many were also recruited to become doctors and nurses for the many new shops Naruto had commandeered to treat the rampant diseases plaguing the region. With the continued improvement in living conditions, the population had named a new king in their minds. King Robert had done no such favors for the poor, and Flea Bottom had actually worsened when he took power. There were some who had even looked fondly upon the Mad King's reign. At least when the Mad King was in power, There was enough alcohol and food to satisfy the poorest people. With most of the day's notable events taken care of, Naruto moved back to the main base to continue with Daenerys and Missandei. The two had taken to the poorhouse, usually hanging out and talking to the children and helping the elderly with daily tasks. He could see the makings of a great queen in the platinum-haired beauty's future. She had everything necessary to rule the kingdom. Her compassion for others was what attracted Naruto to her in the beginning. When he first met her in Pentos, she greeted him normally and bore him no ill will, even during the process of freeing her from her captors and her brother. He soon found the two women standing next to the converted orphanage, which had been repurposed by one of the more revolting nobles and was being used to house and feed the many children running amok in the slums. Many of the women at Petra's establishments were quite skilled in the culinary arts, and took to feeding the children with relative ease. Kit, you might want to think about taking the next step with those two hitches. If you don't know, who knows what could happen? What are you saying about Kurama? I mean, they're both beautiful women. I've seen the way many of the men in this district looked at them. If you want your plan to succeed, it wouldn't hurt to have the former and future queen in our family. It's not just about the plan. They haven't exactly been open to the idea. Even after everything you've done in this world in the last, you still have no idea when people truly love you. Those two have been dropping so many hints it's not even funny anymore. What are you talking about now? I mean, all those times they invited you over for the night, and all those dinners. They were trying to get to know you and also show their appreciation for everything you've done. With a slack-jawed appearance, Naruto finally realized that maybe the fox might be onto something. Anyway, Kit, I think you could use the night off. I'll take care of Littlefinger and his little attempts at subterfuge. Go talk to those two and see if I'm right. Sighing to himself, Naruto created a clone and Kurama flowed into the new vessel. Kurama had at least 2 chakra tails on the clone. Anyone who believed the young blonde man was an easy prey would be permanently treated with pain. Very well, enjoy your night, Kit. I'll play with the idiot and show him true terror. Nodding, Naruto went to greet the two women laughing with the small children. Kurama hadn't been out in a while, but he knew where everyone important in the country was. He could sense most of the Kit clones about a week's journey north of the capital. The king and queen were returning after their trip had succeeded in convincing Eddard Stark to become the new hand of the king. Petter Baelish was holed up in one of his many brothels in the city, but he was surrounded by at least 20 selvswords. Kurama guessed he was afraid of the rumors of the White Knight scavenging the streets of Flea Bottom. That scum should be afraid. I'm not as subtle as Kit. I'll show him the true face of a demon. Kurama slinked through the city and decapitated every bird Petter had sent to assassinate the team, or report the threat to their plans. Unfortunately for them, they wouldn't see the light of day or the next moon again. Kurama didn't take kindly to those who threatened his family. The shadows were the perfect place for the demon fox. He could kill without a trace. He left bodies mangled beyond belief to chill the effeminate Littlefinger to the bone. But to drive home the point, Kurama decided to eliminate all the soldiers surrounding the man. Sneaking into the brothel was child's play, and the main floor was riddled with filth from the earth. No one would mourn the men who littered the floor of the first floor of the brothel, but their screams woke the soldiers charged with protecting the master of coin. What the hell is going on out there? Petter wasn't having the best week, and now there were screams of murder right outside his door. It sounds like a slaughterhouse down there. Well, go there and check it out. Why do you think I'm paying you fools? The men walked out the door and down the stairs to discover a crowd of dead and dying men moaning for mercy but finding none. Some of the greener soldiers began vomiting guts all over the floor. There were some men who had been cut in half and were still crawling towards their lower limbs. Even the men who had witnessed the real battle and were more accustomed to the hell that was the battlefield were horrified by the utter devastation that had been wrought upon the men. What the hell did this do? No, what? The question is who? And I'm here to please, that would be me. Standing in front of the men was a teenager who couldn't have been more than 16. He wasn't wearing heavy armor or wielding anything remotely terrifying. He was just smirking at the men who had been sent by Baelish. I don't know who the hell you are, dwarf, but you picked the wrong brothel to challenge. We're the men who will be tearing the flesh from your bones. So prepare to beg for mercy. Oh, damn it, you just took the words right out of my mouth. With a wicked grin, Kurama snapped the speaker in two with his bare hands. Now who's next? Trembling from the teen's sheer brutality, the remaining men were shocked into a stupor. Too bad Kurama didn't care. Moving on to the next nearest man, Kurama continued the carnage and ripped off his own limbs and used them to bludgeon the man to death. That had the effect of bringing the remaining men out of their haze, and they charged at the demon, hoping to overwhelm it. They were slow and weak compared to the fox, as it weaved in and out of their ranks, allowing no one to touch it. Tearing at flesh as it went, large chunks were missing from many of the men who attacked first. They crawled along the ground, holding their insides against their bodies, trying to keep their lives within them. They would be the first to die, but the rest would soon follow. Petra could hear the men struggling against the man attacking his establishment. He believed the sounds of screams and moans were those of the assailant pleading for mercy. But the similarity between what he was hearing and the voices of his own men was too similar to ignore. From the silence that permeated the now deathly still brothel, Petra knew the monster who began cannibalizing his many brothels was outside his door. Entering the room, his coat covered in blood and guts, Kurama allowed Petra to look outside his door at the carnage the fox had created. Petra Baelish, I presume? Littlefinger was terrified by the man who entered. He was at least as tall as the mountain, and almost as large around him. Kurama had decided to bulk up to create the illusion of another player in Game of Thrones. He didn't want to allow this man to find the kit or his family. What do you want? Is it gold? I have a chest full of it in the vault behind me. It's yours for the taking. I won't call the city watch or anyone else if you let me live. Petra knew he was begging like a coward, but he needed to live if he was going to get revenge on this muscle-bound brute. I'll be more than happy to take the chest. But that's not all I'll need. I think this establishment needs new management. What do you think? Shaking with fury and fear, Petra knew he was in a really tough spot. There would be no turning back from here. This man wouldn't stop until he took everything from him. But that would take time. Petra knew he could amass an army to crush this upstart, and then we'd see what this idiot would squeal about. Of course, go ahead, my house is your house. No, I don't think this is your house anymore. Now, would you please leave? With a final dismissal, Kurama finished the man off. He had shown the potential player that he was weak and vulnerable, could be easily eliminated, and there would be no one to mourn him. To add insult to injury, Kurama threw the head of his main guard at the injured man. Oh, I thought you might want a souvenir to remember your stay. I hope you don't mind that I didn't finish it. Petra held the man's head in his hands, the terrified expression etched on his face for eternity. Descending the blood-soaked stairs, Littlefinger slipped several times in the filth, vomit, and guts of his men and the rest of his customers. The only ones left intact were the women, huddled in a corner guarded by another brutal man. Coming out into the light covered in filth and blood, Littlefinger dropped the fool's head and ran as fast as he could back home. Running through the streets of King's Landing covered in blood and guts was a sight to behold. Kurama looked down from the top of the brothel's roof, chuckling at the once feared Littlefinger. It would be fun to squash him, always plodding his way to the top. The fox wondered how the kid was doing. Naruto entertained the children at the local orphanage with tricks and mild demonstrations of his many elemental jutsus. They marveled whenever he made clay golems or large balls of fire that burned through the air. The children always asked for more and more tricks, and Naruto was happy to oblige, knowing the harsh reality of their situation as an orphan himself. Daenerys and Missandei were both watching the teen and had the same thoughts on the matter. He was an enigma. They had seen the brutality he could offer, but also the kindness he would show to children did not adhere to the monster label that many would place upon him. He was someone they could both see themselves settling down with, but he was only a man and would not share themselves with him. Therefore, the two women had come to an agreement. They would both do their best to woo the teen and see which one he would choose. And after he made his choice, they would honor it, and whoever wasn't chosen would be fine with the decision. Although there was a big difference between words and actions, they both knew it wouldn't end there. All of this was happening without Naruto's knowledge. No matter what time it was, there would never be a moment when Naruto would be unaware of the women's emotions, especially towards him. When he looked back at the two, he smiled broadly and gestured for them to join in the children's joy. They could both see that he was very well liked by the children, and would make an excellent father. His devotion to family was well known. He had actually ripped a man in half because he had tried to separate a mother from her daughter in one of the most lawless areas of Flea Bottom. Upon joining the teenager, the two women soon forgot their agreement, and simply enjoyed the day as they played with the blonde hero while giving the children one of the most memorable days of their very young lives. Now that most of Flea Bottom was free of crime and disease, there had been a steady influx of children and young adults loitering in the square and surrounding alleys. The children were searching for their intrepid hero, who had decided that a game of hide-and-seek would be a good training tool for the children to learn the skills necessary to survive in this harsh world. The many hiding places in which he remained invisible allowed him to see how well informed the children were about their surroundings and the people around them. He tickled those he caught in fits of giggles and hid from the rest. By the time dinner arrived, only a few had escaped his giggle fit. It was soon reduced to a single cunning young girl who hid in the small crevices of buildings. She was eventually caught by Naruto, but resisted as he tickled her relentlessly. Laughing uproariously, Naruto proclaimed himself the hide-and-seek champion. The children, seeing their opportunity, piled on the teenager and exacted their own version of ticklish revenge. Squealing like a schoolgirl, Naruto begged for mercy, but the children interrupted unnecessarily and continued their tickle attack. Smiling for the first time in a long time, Naruto enjoyed the game immensely. Seeing the children's smiling faces reminded him exactly why he was fighting. This world would know peace, and the gods would help whoever stood in their way. As the children tickled the ninja to death, Daenerys and Missandei watched with strange glee in their eyes. The teenager had caught them too and tickled them both before the children in the town square. Feeling a sense of foreboding, the children shouted goodbye and left the two beauties to feast their eyes on the young hero. Of mercy? From their glowing eyes, Naruto could clearly tell that perhaps the tickle attack wasn't something to be used on grown women. Naruto tried to escape, but the girls latched onto him and dragged him back to their home in King's Landing. The boy felt a little guilty about the turn of events, but smiled anyway at the girlish screams of pain Naruto emitted. Watching the two saunter into the house, dragging their rear ends toward the chairs lining the living room, Naruto could attest that they were both curvy women. Trying and failing to hide his growing attraction, Naruto could see their smiles go from evil to downright devilish. Now, what to do with our victim Missandei? I don't know, miss, maybe a flogging? Oh no, that would be too easy for him. What he truly deserves is torture as well. Now searching for every exit he could, Naruto could see at least 5 evacuation points to escape. Now just a way to distract them. What he didn't notice was the way Daenerys and Missandei smiled at each other. With a sway of their seductive hips, they began to dance to a song only they could hear. All thoughts of leaving had just flown away for Naruto. What without much more thought going into his brain at the moment, Naruto was amazed by the way their bodies simply rocked and swayed in a hypnotic motion that left him speechless with hunger. He could see every little drop of sweat running down their long necks to their curvaceous breasts. They would both be called small, but they sure got the largest endowments when it came to bust size. From the platinum-haired beauty and her untouched pearl-colored skin, to Missandei's bronze-coated chocolate mocha lotto skin that was enough to make Naruto start drooling like an invalid. The girls really knew how to make him stand out, half smiling at him, knowing that one's inclination in favor had caused the other's absence from the blonde-haired hero. They had made a pact, but the situation was a little different than they imagined. This had started as a way to tease the blonde, but both girls knew nothing about the opposite hex or anything to do with the carnal arts. All they knew in their hearts was that they wanted to spend more time with the person they loved. Naruto could feel the tension in the air and watched as their movements became more mechanical and less sensual. It seemed as though they were both still new to the more adult aspects of relationships, and there also seemed to be a sort of unease about the two women. It could have stemmed from some other issue plaguing the two or something the young hero had done. Naruto had never been overly worldly, but he knew when his friends or family were keeping something important from him. He never wanted them to feel uncomfortable around him, but that was what was happening with the two of them in the room. Do you guys want to talk about it? The two young women stopped their actions and stood around the room, followed by an awkward silence. I know it's not my place to butt into something between you two, but maybe it would make it easier if you two talked it out. Judging by the flushed faces and hanging heads, that wasn't the right thing to say. Sighing at the situation, Naruto guided the two to sit down and did his best to break the ice. With a nod, multiple clones appeared and began preparing dinner for the trio. Perhaps a meal would loosen their lips. The two women were still processing what to do in this situation. It might be time for Naruto to take a more practical approach here. Sitting between the two, Naruto tried to get them to talk to each other or to him. He held their hands and gently circled the backs of their hands, trying to get them comfortable enough to talk about whatever was bothering them. It was at this moment that a nagging thought permeated the usually dense hero. Kurama had said that the two of them might like, even love, him. Now that he'd seen what their affection had brought him, he didn't want to alienate either of them. They were both very dear to him. He'd grown to love them as well from the time he spent with them. With Daenerys, it had been so easy, with her renowned beauty and kind soul. The same could be said for Missandei, but she had a bit more of an edge to her personality. She'd learned the hard way not to trust others in this world. That was why it was such a shock that she could ever fall in love with someone she'd known for little more than a month. But he'd gotten under her skin with his tireless determination and the kindness he'd shown both to her and to those who had less. With a determined nod, Naruto held the two in his arms and whispered that he loved them both deeply. Naruto gently rubbed his hands over their bodies, just wanting things to go back to the way they were. With them all having fun and playing with each other, the strain of their suppressed feelings was painful for the hero to watch. The girls gasped in relief at the way Naruto had told them about his own feelings for the two of them. They were encouraged by his light touches on their bodies and were growing to enjoy the sensations his hands could draw from them. Every time he ghosted over their skin, it felt as if an electric current passed through and stimulated every inch of their nubile bodies. They could feel the rough calluses on his hands from the grueling training he must have put his body through to protect his family and make his dream for this country a reality. They knew he had big plans for this country, but he never told them what exactly that entailed. He was always secretive about the inner workings of his plan, and whether intentional or not, it was a bit irritating to both girls. Though he always asked their advice when it came to the city itself, it had been at Daenerys' suggestion that he build the new orphanage for the children. Though she had taken that as taking it away from some disgusting noble, it had served its purpose. Perhaps those grand plans of his included the two women becoming more to him than friends. Perhaps he included Daenerys and Missandei becoming his wives and ruling this empire with him. The clones finished their tasks, and dinner was served. The trio had spent the better part of an hour skating on the topic of their relationship. The meal included roast goose, mashed potatoes with creamy gravy, and plenty of rye bread to soak it all up. Though still preoccupied with the growing feelings in the room, the trio gained a hearty appetite when the amount of delicious food was placed in front of them. The meal was finished with an apple tart to round it all out. With their hunger sated and their stomachs full, the two women could now focus on the more immediate issue of tensions between them. It seemed Naruto was more than willing to share his love with them, but would they do the same? They had assumed one would be all Naruto would choose. It would be a dream for any man to have either of the two beautiful women to call his own. But to have both was now a fantasy many men would kill to receive. Deciding to let the two decide how they wanted to proceed with this, Naruto bid them good night as he headed to the second floor to prepare for the night ahead. Well, that was an eventful night. What do you think about what he said? I don't know how to feel about this. I always knew I cared deeply for him, but hearing him say that was a relief to my heart. What will my lady do now? I want to follow my heart and become someone really close to Naruto, but I don't know if I should share it with others. Others? Yeah, the way he said he cared for both of us equally. He implied something completely different. I think he has more women than the two of us here. What? Really? Yes, he had said he wanted to unite the kingdom. I think he might have meant that through marriage. He was very open about loving more than one. I see that if he has others, what are we going to do? Daenerys pondered the question for a moment before coming to her own conclusion. She would make sure to be one of the women who would change the world and would also be by Naruto's side when he became the new ruler of Westeros. She had always feared when her brother would become king and abuse her, and the country at large with his grandiose idea of ruling by fear. Naruto had adopted the mentality of embracing the masses and improving the lives of those less fortunate. Something that Daenerys was very keen to pursue. She had always been kind to her violent brothers. But to be by Naruto's side, she might have to share, and she didn't know any of the other women in his new harem. If she could have a confidant and ally in the group who would make accepting the awkward dynamic much easier, that ally would be Missandei. She had already proven herself to be an honest and forthright person. Something that would prove invaluable in the coming trials. With her course set, Daenerys outlined her plan for the future to Missandei. Missandei was a little surprised by the plan Daenerys presented, but she wasn't entirely against it. She hadn't wanted to rule anything, but if she had to be with the one she loved, so be it. With that, the two women headed to the second floor to inform Naruto of their mutual decision. Naruto was lying in bed, thinking about how best to introduce himself to the world at large, when the two beauties entered his room to inform him of their decision. They each took one of the blonde's arms and pulled him closer to their bodies. With a kiss from each beautiful woman, the decision was made, and they were able to move on. Naruto wasn't one to let a kiss go, and he slowly introduced the two to what he'd learned from all the other women in Westeros. Gliding his fingers along their silky skin, he lightly stimulated their bodies with his lightning chakra. It had the instant effect of warming and blushing them both as it flowed through them. Snuggling deeper into their arms, Naruto began peppering them with soft kisses from their exposed necks to their collarbones. Each kiss ignited feelings of lust and longing for the girls, and they crossed their legs with warmth spreading through their cores. As he hugged Missandei tightly against his body, she could feel every muscle in his body, and the attraction was making him hard as steel. Rubbing her nubile body against him, the mocha-kissed teen was making him moan with lust. He wanted to take her right there. Daenerys wasn't being careless, as Naruto had prepared a duplicate to truly enjoy the platinum-haired beauty's sensual body. Sliding his hands up and down her beautiful rear to her pricky breast, she was truly a goddess on earth. Fortunately, the bed was big enough for all four of them, otherwise, there would be a few bodies on the floor, though that wouldn't have mattered to the blonde hero. He'd mount them anywhere, everywhere. The two women hadn't expected the amount of lust Naruto was instilling in them. They wanted the blonde now. He was rubbing all the right places, and with the light lightning stimulating their most private areas, both the original and the duplicate crawled up their bodies and soon had their faces right between the beauty's legs. Breathing hot air onto her nether lips, they both moaned in ecstasy and clutched at her blonde hair as he licked lightly. He tasted both of them at the same time, and he loved it. They both tasted sweet and a little like strawberries. He wondered if they would bathe together. It had the added benefit of making Naruto lick them even more eagerly. Her legs became vices around his head, and he wouldn't have it any other way. They soon had their first climax, flooding his lips with her juices. It was heaven for both of them, and they were just experiencing their first taste. Naruto would show them what true pleasure was, but first, he wanted to taste their supple bodies until they had nothing left to give. Licking happily, he induced release after release until they were both spent and gasping for air from the assault. Daenerys didn't think it was possible to experience so much in such a short time, but Naruto wasn't the number one unsuspecting ninja for nothing. He was truly living up to his name, and gaining new members for his ever-growing family. These two would be welcome additions, and Naruto would have them ragged with lust. Missandei wasn't much better, moaning from the continued assault, and rubbing her lips against the motion of Naruto's tongue. He was licking and nibbling at her, and she was coming loose and climaxing on top of him. He held her legs in the air as he devoured her and massaged her pert rear with his rough, callous hands. She dribbled all over his mouth, and he continued, licking her most intimate area. Two of the most beautiful women in the world were being devoured and hanging with their asses in the air for the whole world to see. Soon, Naruto removed his lips from their buds and extended his tongue completely, and delved even deeper into them. They were now screaming in pleasure, and were on their way to being knocked out by all the pleasure. From the way they were being held, they soon realized they weren't the only ones enjoying this. Their faces were at just the right height to see Naruto's throbbing pull. They gulped at the size, both fearing how such a large thing would fit into their small bodies. With one last moan of pleasure, they both fell unconscious from the pleasure of Naruto's actions. Licking the last drops of juice off, Naruto carefully placed them side by side and snuggled up next to them to wait for them to wake up. Though that would be a challenge as Naruto was straining against her underwear. Hastily removing it, Naruto jumped and nestled between her warm derriere. Sawing her entrances, Naruto loved the feeling of both of them snuggled around him. It was duplicated by the doppelganger sliding between Missandei's perky rear. The sawing motion soon woke the girls from their stupor to find Naruto firmly ensconced between their legs. He was using their silky thighs and plump ass to ease his steel rod into them. They began to move with him, and he knew they had woken up. Sliding their dresses down their delicate bodies, Naruto soon stripped them of their clothes and got even harder, if that was possible. They were complete opposites in skin tone, but their bodies blended perfectly together, her breasts just the right amount. Kneading them incessantly, Naruto was in heaven, sliding between their legs and massaging their soft, juicy mounds. Their bodies molded against his and soon settled into a rhythm that had both the girls and Naruto moaning in ecstasy. With one final thrust, he painted their asses with his seed and used it to lubricate their buttocks and thighs. Sliding in and out, and also rubbing against their nether lips. Daenerys and Missandei were shocked by the amount of seed Naruto had released. It was enough to paint them white from their lower hips down. With his continued rubbing of her sensitive lips, it was no surprise when they soon joined him in bliss, mingling their juices with his. Now they were truly eager to feel him inside them. Turning around in his arms, the two women kissed him deeply and pushed accordingly, signaling that they were ready for the main event. Looking into their eyes and seeing the lust and love, Naruto knew he would make this the best thing they'd ever felt. Nodding, Naruto signaled his clone to line up and enter Missandei. With a deep kiss, Naruto slowly sank into both women, and they moaned at the thick flesh entering their wet lips. Each inch filled them completely until he reached their maidenhood. He looked down at them to ask once more if this was what they wanted, and both women simply kissed him deeper than before. With a final thrust, he broke their maiden buds and took their most precious gift. They cried out in pain at the intrusion but mewed softly at being so filled. Letting them get used to his girth, Naruto simply held them in his arms and rubbed soothing circles on their backs. When they nodded that they were ready, Naruto began to gently rock in and out of them. The cries of pain soon turned into moans of pleasure, and Naruto wasn't going to stop until they turned into screams of pure, mind-blowing pleasure. Moving in and out and getting into a rhythm, Naruto soon had the bed rocking with their combined movements. The girls pushed against Naruto, doing their best to increase the friction and heighten the pleasure. He began licking around and sucking on their breasts, inducing another burst of moans from both of them. They grabbed his head and pulled him into a blistering kiss that brought him to her luscious lips. Sucking on their tongue, he made them continue moaning in ecstasy. When they stopped crying in pain, he picked up the pace. Now he could really pound them. They clutched the headboard and watched mesmerized as he pounded away with abandon. Grabbing her legs and carrying them on his shoulders, Naruto could truly feel every inch of her body. They soon climaxed around him, but he wasn't close to finishing and continued to abuse her nether lips. Massaging their juicy buns and rolling in them, he was giving them everything he'd learned from Cersei and Caitlyn, reaching their most intimate places and driving them mad with lust and pleasure. He could see their eyes rolling to the back of their heads and their tongues lolling out. He bucked them silly. Lifting them onto their sides, he closed their legs and increased the pressure around them. He could feel them clamping down on him, but he continued pumping in and out of them. The pleasure was enormous, and soon they were staining the sheets again. They were reaching the level of La La Land. They could no longer resist and simply lay spent on the bed. He continued plundering their depths and truly showed them the greatest pleasure they had ever known. Release after release, and the bed was soaked with the women's juices. He'd have to ask for another one when they were finished in the morning. Flipping them over again, he had them face down and their delicious derrieres in the air for him to pound. He was bouncing on their perky bottoms, and they were being pounded against the bed. Grabbing her legs again and wrapping them around him, Naruto roared loudly and released himself deep inside them, filling them with his seed. It spilled out into a pool on the bed with their juices, and he continued pumping as he released. Each pump would plow more and more of his seed deeper and deeper into them. They were now dead to the world, completely screwed into a deep stupor. However, he continued to slake his lust with their noble bodies and pumped into them repeatedly until he was satisfied. Each new hour would arouse him, taking them to new heights of pleasure as he filled them to the brim with his seed. They hadn't known a man could last that long, but Naruto was a demon in man flesh. He had the energy to satiate every woman in King's Landing and then some. So 2 women in one night wasn't going to be close enough. He would please them until morning and wake them with his continued plundering. When morning came, the 2 of them were stuffed to the brim and had been painted white all over. The bed was a mess and their minds were delirious with pleasure, their faces wearing a semi-permanent grin from the beatings they'd taken. Naruto was impressed with their resolve. They'd stayed awake for almost 2 hours before succumbing to a pleasant sleep. Naruto had still been deeply inside them that morning, but they bottled him up at night and wouldn't let him go. He was fine with that, and it was great waking up in the morning inside the 2 beauties. He gently pumped into them, and they meowed accordingly. Laughing at the 2, Naruto appeared, and they were already missing the warmth. Their stomachs were full to the brim, and he wasn't the goose from last night. Running his hand down their bellies, he pressed lightly, and his seed spurted from their lips. He'd definitely have to find another bed. Perhaps he could convince another nobleman to part ways with him? Or perhaps his wife? Laughing at the thought, Naruto switched himself with a clone and greeted the new day of adventures. He would definitely enjoy being king when he had his whole family together. Chapter 9. The day continued like any other at Naruto's house. Currently he was deep inside Missandei and Daenerys. He was pounding and loving the feeling of them simply clinging to him. It was causing so much delicious friction that their tongues were hanging out of their mouths. He knew what they could do with their tongues. They took it with gusto and soon began to lick and suck his numerous specimens. Missandei had such beautiful caramel skin that he wanted so badly to paint it with his seed, and she had crisscrossing white blotches on her chest and face. She licked it all up and wanted more. He had created a slut in the bedroom. He rode her hard and truly lived up to his reputation as a stamina god. He could do this for eternity, but he knew the women would be relaxing. But those thoughts were for another time, and he swatted away those images as he held Missandei close to his chest. She was becoming quite adept at coaxing his seed out, and he was only too happy to paint her. Her hair was flecked with his white cream, and she was no longer bushy. His seed weighed down her hair and gave it a white sheen. She was lost in pleasure and didn't care a lick how she looked to outsiders. He held her close and entered her with fierce thrusts, and she, in turn, moaned with lust as she was completely filled. She rode him from above, and he groped her breast with his rough, callous hands. He pumped in and out with enough force that her ass bounced against his hips. Her pert bottom was the perfect vessel with which he could sink right into her. The extra cushion was necessary with the way he rode her. She had already released numerous times around him, each thrust hitting those same spots that would make her see whiteheads in her eyes. The pleasure was intense. He didn't let up on the pounding. If she could have turned her head, she would have seen Daenerys in the same boat as her. The young queen was also being mounted by the blonde, but from behind and pushed against the bed quite hard. He was pounding in and out, his butt providing a nice cushion for her hips and eliciting a pleasing sucking sound from her nether lips. She was taking him in, and he, in turn, was moving out of her and still moaning when she felt him leave her. His piston was hot and full, a sensation she didn't want to be without. It might end up being the case that she was joined at the hip with Naruto because of this turn of events. She was lost in the sensations the blonde had caused in her. She had started out in love with him, but now she desired him on a whole new level. Her platinum hair was dyed white with his seed and her angelic face was splattered with the white stuff. She licked the droplets as they cascaded into her mouth while she was pounded from behind. Naruto grabbed a handle from her modest breast to truly plow the teen and show her untold new heights of pleasure. Each thrust found a new spot on her bud, and she could feel the shocks of ecstasy they brought her. She climaxed around the blonde hero again and again, her eyes rolling to the back of her head with pleasure. She was moaning at the height of lovemaking when she was silenced by another copy of the blonde. Filled to the brim from behind and front, Daenerys breathed in through her nose and all she smelled was Naruto. He was rolling in her mouth and making her lips wrap around his base. She used her tongue to massage the teen, and he was very grateful for the gesture. She pinched his breast to cause a little pain that translated into her wetting and releasing once more. The two ladies were a sight to behold, an all too familiar sight around Naruto, whether it was Daenerys and Missandei or Cersei and Caitlyn. He was truly making Westeros his kingdom and his family. While the two were out of it, Naruto slowly brought them closer to each other and faced them towards each other. He pounded each woman and slowly ground their bodies against each other. Both Daenerys and Missandei were feeling the tingling sensation running through their bodies at the feminine touch that was rubbing against them. He could see their panting mouths slowly moving closer to each other. Grabbing their juicy asses, Naruto began to pound the two teens even more frantically. Rubbing himself against their lips and causing their bodies to slide together with the mixture of their combined juices and Naruto's seed, it was all enough for the two to begin grabbing the nearest thing and embracing it completely. Their lips were glued to each other, and Daenerys frantically groped Missandei's perky breast. Missandei was doing the same, all while Naruto pounded her from behind. The two were in a whole new world of pleasure, and Naruto was the architect of the festivities. He had them lying on top of each other, and could create even more friction between the three of them. His piston was thrusting in and out of both women's nether lips and hitting their glutes and bouncy butts. With both women pumping themselves all over him, Naruto kept pace and soon felt his own release. He covered them completely inside and out. Daenerys and Missandei were licking the seed that coated each of their bodies. Licking from their navels to their chest ridges, sucking out all the milk they could. With their stomachs full, they slid back against Naruto and allowed him to continue riding them for the next 2 hours. They had been broken by the amount of pleasure they had experienced, and were of no use to anyone for at least a day with the way their minds turned to jelly. With the two women occupied for the moment, Naruto flowed through his remaining clones and found one traveling with the Queen and the Starks. They had made good time back at the capital, but there was an incident with Joffrey that he would have to deal with soon. That boy is crazy, he has a vengeful streak in his body that would make the devil blush. Knowing that the best course of action was to take the child out of the equation, Naruto had planned to eliminate the boy in one of the local cities. Unfortunately, there was still the problem of Cersei. She wouldn't be so inclined to have her baby die in the boonies. Therefore, Naruto would have to find another way to deal with the crazy brat. The incident wouldn't have been so bad if he hadn't done anything to Arya and Sansa, but the jester had in mind that Sansa was his. That was something Naruto's clone had corrected at that point. A few broken ribs had been enough to deter the teenager from laying a finger on Sansa. Although he had gone to Cersei to cry, thankfully Naruto had persuaded Cersei to see his side of the conflict. That persuasion had been really fun, but they had to go through the forest to avoid being caught by the guards or her annoying husband, the Fat King. Arya had wreaked her own vengeance on the future heir to the throne. A kick in the trash was far more satisfying than breaking a few ribs. Joffrey was scared of both girls now, and with good reason. One could kick Braavos' ass and back, and the other had the blonde terror protecting her. Ned Stark had been a little surprised to see his wife accompanying him to King's Landing, but he insisted that she stay close to her daughters. Though there was a hint of color in his cheeks when he mentioned the two girls. He couldn't for the life of him understand it, but he could see how miserable she would be without their company. Therefore, she had left Robb in charge of Winterfell for now while she put the kingdom's affairs in order. From the way Robert was whoring and drinking, it seemed he had returned at the right time. What she didn't know and would never understand was that Caitlyn was being beaten night after night by Naruto while Ned was away with Robert. She was always caught limping the next day due to the extreme nature of their activities. It was especially exciting when they were joined by Cersei, who had formed a sisterly bond with the Stark matriarch. Though that could have been due to the nature of her relationship with the blonde hero, after having him inside them for so long, they had been the only ones to truly understand each other's situation. It also helped that Naruto cavorted with the two of them and had them pleasure each other while riding them simultaneously. Continuing on, the group was a day's journey to the capital. There were messages from Littlefinger about a new player in town. Robert chuckled at the bastard's sarcastic plight, though he was a little concerned about the takeover of the brothels. He was known to frequent quite a few of them during his time as king. The cleanup of Flea Bottom was good news for Robert, though it wasn't his fault. Ned was curious about the nature of the new threat, and what exactly this person was trying to gain by looting Petra's establishments and cleansing the poor. It was almost as if the individual wanted to improve people's lives and make himself king. However, that was nonsense, because Robert had the right to do so, and there would be riots across the country if anyone openly challenged Robert for the throne. Ned had begun talking to his guest Naruto about the man's actions in the city. The young blonde man had been a mystery to the stone-faced northern leader, but he usually had good advice on what was happening in the city. He stated that, from his point of view, the mysterious individual was helping people for something bigger, but what would be the point of fighting the man? Wouldn't it be better for the city if the more seedy elements were taken care of? Plus, there was the added benefit of feeding many hungry people in Flea Bottom. Ned acknowledged the point, but was still wary of looking this gift horse in the mouth. For all he knew, this supposed savior was really a masked conquistador in disguise. Naruto chuckled at the accusation and how close it had come to describing what he intended to do. Thanking the teenager for his advice, Ned went to find Robert to discuss the upcoming capital trials. Naruto was only too eager to see Ned off, as he had a date with his exquisite wife. Walking back through the camp, Naruto listened to the hushed murmurs that plagued any new camp. He could hear the men whispering about how someone so young had earned so much respect from the Warden of the North. He chuckled at their attempts to find out, and also at their pointed looks of jealousy at the way he was allowed to speak to both Ned and the king. There were even some rumors that those who got too close to the blonde were rendered unconscious or worse. Many of the men had tried to follow the young man and find out what he meant to the king and Ned, but all had been met with either wind or a severe headache the next day. Naruto didn't take kindly to those who intruded on his time with the women close to him. Though the men had caught on early on, there was now hardly anyone who dared follow the teen. He didn't directly attack the men who followed him, but they always ended up in the worst positions and with mind-numbing headaches. Upon finding the two women he was looking for, Naruto discovered they were in the queen's tent discussing the new additions to their family. Though Caitlyn arguably already considered them family, Arya and Sansa hadn't been present with Naruto recently. The last time at Winterfell was the last time Caitlyn had witnessed her daughter's unbridled lust for Naruto. "Good evening, ladies. How are you tonight?" Surprised by the sudden appearance of the man they had just been talking about, the two women nevertheless warmed to his presence. "Naruto, don't do that! You know that scares me to death." "I apologize, my lady. Now, what of your daughters?" Caitlyn was a little annoyed at having overheard their conversation. "I wanted to know if you really want to include them in this crazy plan of yours." "Of course, I love them very much." Cersei was smiling at the distress this was causing Caitlyn. She had accepted her role as a sister in this family, but she still enjoyed tormenting her new family. The Lannister streak of pride was strong in the queen, but that had been tempered by her love for Naruto. Sighing at the situation, Caitlyn knew it was an argument she wouldn't win. Probably because Naruto could persuade her so easily otherwise. Speaking of persuasion, Naruto had become negligent and needed to rectify that. Taking each woman by the hand, Naruto led them to the bed in the tent and really had his way with her. Thankfully, the moans and groans softened as Naruto filled each woman's mouth with something to work with. With each woman's cum, they wouldn't be hungry or conscious for the rest of the night. Any meddling soldiers were soon dealt with and placed a good 200 meters outside the camp in the most uncomfortable positions imaginable. Their clones really did a good job when their reward was so delicious and juicy. Winter was coming to Westeros, but Naruto was sure to warm the women across the kingdom. Chapter 10. The view from the hill overlooking King's Landing was a sight to behold. It was a corrupt city and filth covered the ground, but from afar it was a gem in the distance. Naruto wondered how Kurama was doing with the extermination of the many huts Baelish had set up throughout the city. The man was persistent in giving him that, but there would be nowhere to hide his ill-gotten gains, and Naruto would enjoy making him the poorest wretch in all of Westeros. The king had been clamoring to return to the city because he was eager to try Littlefinger's wares again. Unfortunately for him, there were fewer and fewer establishments in the city. It was a miracle that most of Flea Bottom wasn't plagued by disease and hunger. The shipments of fresh food and clean clothes had done wonders for the population. Now Naruto was the savior of the people and was gathering followers by the hundreds. Very soon he would not need to go to war, the people would rebel and crown him as their new sovereign. Going through the masses instead of the nobility had its advantages, first and foremost being the lack of ulterior motives and the general lack of backstabbing that followed with the nobility. Naruto couldn't remember the last time he had to listen to nobles ramble on about his supposed slights and dents to their honor. When all was said and done, it was just a way for the Cretans to gain more money or land from the king himself. Robert wasn't known for his intelligence, and had made deals that didn't benefit the crown in the slightest. Most of the agreements were detrimental, and the crown would lose thousands in revenue and be tied to greedy nobles. Naruto would change all of that when he became sovereign, but that was for another time. The entourage had arrived at the city and were greeted with a mix of boos and cheers. The king was not loved, but when the people saw Naruto atop the caravan, they cheered for their savior. Fortunately, Robert thought the cheers were for him and didn't question why the people craned their necks skyward. Laughing at the situation, Naruto nonetheless waved to the people and gestured for them to disperse as the caravan moved on to the Red Keep. Some members of the small council were waiting for the king when he arrived, especially Varys and Baelish. Though the latter didn't look as elegant as before, running through life did that to a man. "Welcome back, Your Excellency. How was your trip north?" "It was good. I'm eager to see a woman in one of your fine establishments." Laughing at the man, Baelish led him toward the city and one of his last remaining brothels. Naruto watched the king leave and smiled at the rags Baelish had fled in. "I'll enjoy ripping that man apart from head to toe. How's the Kurama killing going?" "Well, Kit, but I wanted to leave the last ones to you. I know you wanted to see his dreams shattered with your own eyes." Chuckling darkly, Naruto was grateful for the fox and everything he did to undermine and scare the wretch. "Sounds like fun, but first we should get the family settled in for the night." With the king otherwise preoccupied, the queen greeted the rest of the small council as Naruto escorted the Warden of the North and his family to their chambers while he remained in the capital. Ned had shaken his head at the king's antics, but was otherwise immune to the madness Robert sowed. He saw that most of the population hadn't cheered for the king, but actually for Naruto, but he couldn't figure out why. Naruto had been with them the entire journey from the north, there was no way he was here in the city, and why would they cheer for him? The questions surrounding the teenager were multiplying rapidly. Ned knew he was special. The many abilities he had demonstrated were reason enough to warrant caution around the teenager. Ned had never been known as a superstitious man, but the things Naruto could do defied reason. Unfortunately, his thoughts on the matter would have to wait. The small council had been informed that he was the new hand of the king. They flocked to him like moths to a flame, pestering him with new problems they had encountered in the capital. Rumors swirled that some organization operated in the heart of Flea Bottom, but none of Baelish or Varys' spies or birds could penetrate the veil of the city's poorest sector. It was as if someone knew the game better than those two snakes. If that were true, they would be a formidable opponent. While Ned was preoccupied with the small council, Naruto had settled the Starks into their room and made them comfortable. The queen had retired to her own room and asked Naruto to visit her in the evening for another session. Naruto was only too happy to oblige and promised he would see her tonight. Naruto knew there would be a tournament for Ned. It was an honor for him to become the new hand of the king. He'd heard that much of the kingdom would be attending. Notable knights from all over the kingdom would joust and fight for the king's honor. Well, that, and the prize purse going to the winner amounted to tens of thousands of golden dragons. From his sources in the House of Tyrell, he knew that Loras Tyrell would also be joining. Marjorie's brother had been known as an accomplished knight in his own right, though he would have some trouble with a new entry into the fold. Naruto had grown a little restless without all the adrenaline in his system. He would welcome the ruthless violence that accompanied the jousting and melee tournament. It would also give him a chance to bring Marjorie closer to the capital, though her mother was no slouch herself. He could see where she got her beauty, Thank the gods Mace hadn't passed her genes down to his children. Marjorie's mother was a challenge for the court, but she too eventually succumbed to her talents. Ellery Tyrell was a stunning beauty who had rejected Naruto many times, but she finally couldn't deny him any longer. Her initiation into the family had been perpetuated by her own daughter, Naruto having urged Marjorie to add her mother to the fold. It was an interesting turn of events as Naruto introduced Lady Tyrell to his many talents. Fortunately for Ellery, her daughter was there to take on some of Naruto's lust and satiate the teenager who painted them white. The Tyrell contingent had arrived a week before the king, and Naruto was on his way to join them. He had created enough clones to entertain both the Starks and Cersei while he attended to the Tyrells personally. He found the two women watching over Loras as he prepared for the slopes. Both were extremely excited to see their son/brother compete and win glory for their house. Though that excitement could also be attributed to the prospect of seeing Naruto once again when they arrived in King's Landing. The two were surprised to see Naruto so early in his visit to the capital, but were nonetheless trying to contain their excitement and longing for the young teen. The group settled into a calm, warm silence as they watched the Flower Knight perfect his craft. Naruto could see many flaws in the teen and also the arrogance that displayed itself throughout his style. The boy seemed overeager and overexerted himself in many of his strikes. It wouldn't take much to capitalize on that and truly put the teen through a world of hurt. Jumping into the pit, Naruto motioned for the teenager to come over to him. He hadn't done his morning exercise and wanted to teach the boy some humility. Mocking the blonde youth, Loras turned his back on him and walked toward his tent to prepare for the joust. With a quick flick of his wrist, Naruto sent a dagger inches from Lora's ankles. This caught the cute boy's attention. Surprised by the peasant's brazenness, Lora nonetheless fastened his helmet and lunged at Naruto. The boy was moving in slow motion, at least that's what it seemed like to Naruto. While the boy who was passing by, Naruto swung his foot out and tripped over the Knight of Flowers. The two women tried hard not to laugh at their son's situation. It would be good if the teenager learned some humility. Surprised by the underhanded tactics, Loras quickly got up from the ground and charged the blonde again. Once again, he hit the ground hard. He was growing tired of the feeling. No one in the Seven Kingdoms had ever made him look like a fool in front of his family. This wretch would feel the cold steel of it when this was over. Taking a new tactic, Loras held back and sized up his opponent for a moment. He could tell he was agile and cunning, but he had no muscle in his bones. He could overpower him if he could just make the blonde stand still. Feinting left and right, Loras tried to get the teen to commit in one direction and cut him in two, but Naruto simply dodged left and right and slashed at him with his sword. The longer the match went on, the more fatigued Loras felt, but he wouldn't give up to this wretch who dared to challenge him to the Flower Knight. Fatigue wasn't the only thing causing problems. Naruto had landed quite a few blows on the knight. He was still wincing from a blow to his shoulder. It felt like someone had used a war hammer instead of a sword. He had underestimated the young man. His strength was more than his thin frame suggested. Naruto was having fun, not as much as he had with Lora's family, but still fun enough. He had the young man panting and groaning from the exertion, plus the bruises couldn't have helped much. The time for games was over. Now he would show the teen how truly abhorrent his skills were. Naruto feinted to the right and got under the knight's guard to deliver a devastating blow to his core. Loras was panting on the ground trying to catch his breath from the blow, but Naruto wasn't finished and delivered his pommel over the young knight, and Loras fell asleep. A round of applause greeted the end of the match. Marjorie and Ellery were happy for the teenager but still didn't fully approve of the lesson given to Loras. Laughing at the two's looks, she assured them that she would have Loras awake in time for the joust. Besides, this way he wouldn't be so arrogant as to think he was the best in the Seven Kingdoms. Nodding at the man's assertion of ego, the two women headed back to their own ward and said Naruto could visit when he was finished tending to the sleeping teen. Speeding up his assessment of the teen, Naruto quickly healed him and propped him up against a wooden bench to help him sleep off the pain. Then, without thinking about Loras, Naruto headed to where he would find Marjorie and Ellery. Finding the two beautiful women already ready and waiting for him, Naruto was excited to test the differences between the two. While Marjorie was more of a classic beauty, Her mother was the one with the generous breasts. They lounged in their pavilion, waiting for the teenager to take his turn. Naruto quickly stripped off his own outer garments, and created numerous clones to entertain the two. He would have them beg for mercy in the near future, but they believed they had the upper hand for now. After chasing the two vixens all over the store, Naruto soon had them right where he wanted them, and the dog piled the two beauties up. Their excited screams from before were now turning into moans of pleasure as Naruto and his doppelgangers provoked the women's basest desires. Alary was beside herself with pleasure as Naruto happily licked her and the clones gently caressed her. They caused incalculable sensations to course through her body. At first, she was horrified at the thought of someone her son's age courting her, but that soon gave way to unimaginable pleasure when he showed her he was beyond her years in the pleasure department. She should have felt guilty about the way she was cheating on her husband, but he never made her feel that way. Besides, he was a jerk who only cared about power or the money he could accumulate for his family. Now there was the matter of the blonde devil licking her. He was sincere in his love and affection, and it also helped that he was a demon in bed. As she remembered her idiot husband, Naruto had already positioned himself over her head and opened her lips with a gentle push. She gladly accepted his food and began sucking and licking her way up and down Naruto's. She had abhorred this kind of play before, but now with Naruto, it had become second nature to reciprocate the pleasure he had given her. He was slowly screwing her face and lightly slapping her fine ass at the same time. She was a beast of a woman with an insatiable appetite for the carnal arts, able to ride him for hours on end. Had he been a normal man, that would have caused her untold rest, but fortunately she was a shinobi and had stamina to spare. While it helped to be the vessel for the Ninetales, the fox had actually saved her life on numerous occasions, and those hadn't been in battle. Naruto had awakened the sexual appetite of every woman he slept with. They were common women to begin with, but after one night with him, they became ravenous in their hunger for his seed. Putting the woman on her hands and knees, Naruto began spit-roasting Marjorie and Loras's mother. She moaned around him and was being drilled from behind by one of her many doppelgangers. Marjorie wasn't doing much better. Her brown hair was covered in his seed, and she was still licking two of his clones. She was being double-teamed from behind by two others and was in a world of pleasure. The bed was filling with all of her juices and his seed. The mother and daughter were one of the most fun tandems she'd ever enjoyed, always trying to outdo each other to see who could extract the most seeds from Naruto. She never knew who won, but she definitely approved of their games. Sliding in and out of the mother while watching her daughter take two of her clones at the same time was magical. Clutching his powerful chest, Naruto plowed her ass like it was nobody's business. He was going to leave his mark on her rosebud and show who really enjoyed herself in the bedroom. There hadn't been anyone else since Naruto took her that fateful day in the courtyard of High Garden. They were feet away from her husband when Naruto kissed her with an exuberance she wasn't used to. They had stalked like animals behind the hedge maze while her husband tried unsuccessfully to find her. Naruto would always be one step ahead, and they had painted the gardens white with his seed. Mace was suspicious of the stains on the roses, but he didn't want to touch or smell the white stuff. Naruto had painted her face and chest with his seed, but some of it got onto the roses in the maze. Her cries of pleasure had been muffled by having Naruto in her mouth all afternoon. Mace had heard muffled sounds, but he could never find his wife or what had caused the sounds in the first place. He had finally abandoned his search and decided to search the castle for his beautiful wife. Laughing at the burly man, Naruto had continued to wreck the gardens with the Lady of High Garden and turn the red roses white. Fondly recalling those early days, Naruto had almost forgotten that he was now deeply embedded inside the lady. Thankfully, Alary was too far away to notice. Thrusting in and out of the red-haired breast, Naruto filled her to the brim while his clone did the same with her mouth. She swallowed it like a good girl and was left stunned and satisfied, but Naruto wasn't done with their little tryst. Spinning her around on his axis, Naruto gestured for his clones to take her place. One of the newer clones switched places with Naruto as he slid right into her juicy breast. He held them together and began to slowly pump between her valley. She was servicing her other clone with her luscious lips, but she could feel the steel between her breast. she gasped as another clone slowly entered her puckered hole, pumping in and out of her tight bud. Having Naruto 4 ways was enough to send the woman to dreamland, and she was being pumped as he thrust in and out. All she could taste, smell, and feel was Naruto. He had become her entire world at this moment. While his mother was quadrupling herself, Marjorie was being triple-dipped by the rest of the doppelgangers. Being roasted while also being taken from behind was interesting to say the least. It should have been scientifically impossible, but Naruto wasn't the most unpredictable ninja in the world for nothing. He held Marjorie with just his chakra. There was no undue stress on the beauty as he plundered her treasures. He had already filled her to the brim a couple of times, but Marjorie wasn't known to be squeamish and carried on like a trooper. There was white all over her body and inside her body, but she continued swallowing and licking with the best of them. She had red hair, but it was hard to tell with the amount of white in her hair. Naturally, the curtains matched the drapes and were also completely covered in white. Plowing her plump ass was like déjà vu for Naruto. It almost felt exactly like his mother's. They were both blessed in the bottom department. Bouncing on her juicy ass, Naruto was close to his limit and filled her ass with his slimy seed. As he pulled out, he could see her puckered hole trying to contain the liquid, but eventually it was like a flood and there was no stopping it. With the sudden release in her ass, Marjorie released her own juices all over the clones. It wasn't too noticeable anyway due to the amount of seed in her nether lips, but it did cause her to clench around Naruto, and that in turn caused him to release inside her again. Her stomach had distended from the amount of seed the clone had released inside her. But that wasn't the end of it, and soon her mouth was filled once again with her new favorite drink. She couldn't swallow it all, and some splashed onto her face and chest, happy as a clam. The 2 releases on both lips made her belly fill even more. It was unimaginable how much seed Naruto could produce. With a wet pop, the clone in her mouth pulled out and sprayed the rest of his seed into her hair and all over her face for good measure. She was effectively bucked up with pleasure, no coherent thought running through her mind except the amount of pleasure that had racked her noble body. The 3 clones disappeared after their festivities, and Marjorie was left moaning and sighing in her own juices, as well as in the clone's seed. It was a sight to behold, the most beautiful rose in Highgarden swimming languidly in a pool of white. While Marjorie dozed off, Allery was being painted from head to toe with Naruto's seed. There wasn't a patch of skin on the mother without white markings. Naruto had pumped deep into her valley and sprayed it all over her face and hair, making sure not to forget her beautiful breast. His clone had screwed her face with abandon, and she was deep inside him. By releasing his seed down her throat, the clone had caused Allery's stomach to expand just as much as Marjorie's had. She wasn't someone to waste on her daughter, and Allery had taken all of his seed without spilling a drop. Swallowing hard, Allery had done the impossible, but the clone wasn't finished and pulled out of her mouth while simultaneously spraying her auburn hair with his seed, her face also not spared from the coating. She used her tongue to lick the residual seed that fell around her mouth. She could smell that musky scent that always accompanied Naruto's release all over her face. However, her ordeal wasn't over, as the 2 men riding her from behind had increased their pace and were pounding her with even more fervor. She was screaming from the blonde's rhythm and power. But luckily for Allery, he helped soothe her mouth with something to lick. The 2 behind her were reaching their peak, and soon the one at her rear was moaning in ecstasy and releasing heavily into her ass. Rope after rope hit her, and she could feel the heat spreading throughout. Without another word, the clone vanished from existence, its purpose fulfilled. Allery moaned around Naruto as the heat left her ass. Allery shouldn't have moaned in disappointment because the man on her lower lips was eager to make her forget the lost warmth. He pounded even more furiously, needing to obtain her release. The deluge that accompanied the clone's final moans was enough to make her look 9 months pregnant. She had never felt so completely and utterly whole in her life, not even those moments in the garden maze at Highgarden. Her moans around Naruto continued as her last clone disappeared. Naruto looked around at his work and was pleased to see both women completely spent and exhausted by his actions. They had thought they would satisfy him, while he knew it would never end. Allery had succumbed to unconsciousness, but she continued to unconsciously suck and lick around him. Naruto was pleased with the unbridled nature of both women and was especially excited by their subconscious desire to continue licking and sucking. He'd chosen his women well. The roses at Highgarden had truly lived up to their billing. Though he'd known all that when he'd set foot on his estate all those days ago. Putting the pavilion in order, Naruto had cleaned up the mess and equipped the ladies on their shifts once more. Placing one of his numerous doppelgangers inside the pavilion, Naruto went outside to see what the day would bring. Once he was outside, he could feel one of the consciousness pulls Kurama used. "What's up, Kurama? I have something to show you, Kit." Flowing through his clones, Naruto was surprised to find something in the north near Winterfell. Reclaiming the clone crouched next to Kurama, Naruto observed what the fox had wanted to show him. It seemed to be a smaller vassal of the Starks. If I remembered correctly, this was House Bolton. "What the hell is going on here? You can see why I called you Kit. This is appalling, but I guess this is what might be possible when humans are left to their own devices." What Kurama was talking about was the numerous flayed men lying face down on the ground. It seemed House Bolton took the house sigil too literally. It was disgusting. There was a rat the size of a child terrorizing the entire castle, laughing its head off as it skinned a man to death. It was cruel and something Naruto found totally unacceptable. If appearances were to be believed, his father or father figure was watching from the sidelines unperturbed. It almost seemed like he was proud of the wretch. "I think the house needs cleaning, Kit." "I think it's Kurama. Want to do the honors?" "It will be a pleasure." Without another word, Kurama had snatched both the unfortunate boy and assumed lord of the castle and transported them to a kingdom of his own design. Ramsay Bolton had been minding his own business and simply passing the time torturing ordinary people when he was dragged into what he could only assume was some kind of hell. He was glad to see his father Roose Bolton there too, but the man seemed different. There was an emotion on his face that had never been there before. Ramsay couldn't quite put his finger on it, but for the first time in a long time, Roose Bolton was completely scared. "Welcome, scum of the earth, to my domain." The two Boltons were staring at what was possibly one of the most terrifying sights of their lives. It was a massive fox-like monster, with numerous rows of teeth and dark red eyes that sought out their dark souls. "I will be your jailer in this kingdom. You have been selected for a special set of punishments that I have detailed exactly for you too." "What are you, beast? And why have you brought us here? We've done nothing wrong, nor do we need punishment." Roose was bold, but secretly he was trembling inside. There was nothing but darkness everywhere, and the only light was the ferocious grin in front of him. "I have looked into your black souls and deemed that you desired it, so I will also instill in you 100, no 1,000 times, the torment you have caused Westeros and its people." The two Boltons were trembling now. They had nowhere to run and this beast had complete control of this dark space. What they couldn't know was that while Kurama had been speaking, he had created numerous leeches that would cause untold violence against the two. Roose had always enjoyed the ritual leech he performed on himself, but now he could feel the creatures crawling up his legs and slowly biting them. Their screams were music to Kurama's ears. Each and every one of the leeches was excreting acid that slowly ate away at the men's legs. Each one felt their skin begin to burn and melt from the corrosive liquid. It was fitting that their skin was melting, because they had done almost exactly the same thing to their enemies. Soon the two were writhing on the ground because their legs no longer supported them. Ramsay was begging for mercy, while Kurama was laughing his head off at how the tables had turned. The predator was now the prey, and Kurama took great pleasure in watching the two clutch their legs in pain. The leeches slowly sucked the juices the acid created in the men's bodies. Every time the two tried to grab and pull the leeches, they only made them latch onto their bodies even tighter. The pain had been enough to render them unconscious, but Kurama was unlikely to control every aspect of this realm. He wouldn't let the two of them fall into a world of ignorance when they could experience all the pain they had caused in the world. What the two hadn't counted on was the sudden release Kurama had allowed them, but it was short-lived. After Kurama signaled his leeches to disappear, he conjured knives to remove their remaining flesh. Each slice from the blades was pure agony, as they were now shown exactly what they had done to their victims. By the time Kurama finished, they were gone, but they weren't dead either. He continued to cause them untold pain and prevent their bodies from passing. After the skinning, he reintroduced the leeches to feed more acid to their swollen bodies. Their throats were hoarse from all the screaming and crying they'd done. Unfortunately for them, Kurama was just getting started, soon stripping away the things that made them men. Their high-pitched screams were music to Kurama's ears, their pleas were delicious, and he continued the torture. Now each and every one of their fingers was slowly cut off piece by piece with a rusty knife. Their scalps were removed, along with the hair and toe, and each ear was slowly and horribly mutilated until nothing remained but the whole. All of this was done in the first 15 minutes Kurama had them in his realm, but he would keep them here and continue restoring and torturing them for the next week. His consciousness floated in and out to check on the two and ensure their torture continued. While Kurama was otherwise preoccupied, Naruto had begun to cleanse the Bolton household. Slowly torturing the remaining members of the vicious house, anyone who had participated or otherwise aided the two Boltons was made to pay for their crimes. The innocent were left to their own devices, but he wasn't against the victims repaying their tormentors tenfold. He allowed the population to decide the length and severity of the torture he inflicted on the former ruling class. When it was over, all the tormentors were set aside and displayed in the central plaza. Although she had found Ramsay's insane mirror image, Miranda, who had begged for mercy, took her beneath the castle where she would break her mind. With the job done, Naruto allowed himself to flow back to where Daenerys and the Sandia were. He could use some beauty after all this ugliness created by the monsters of the old house Bolton. While Naruto was busy with the upcoming tournament and the reunion of his two new families, Kurama watched over the north. The wench who had conspired with Ramsay to terrorize the population was now nothing more than a memory. She was so devastated that she tended to Kurama without the fox saying a word. Kurama had plans for the wretch. She'd be good fodder for his next group of monsters. But for now, he let her bow her head below his waist. As for the two Boltons, they were in an eternal spiral of unimaginable pain and sadness as they were constantly tortured and shown how much longer they still had to suffer. Kurama would continue to move the counter for their torture minute by minute to show them that their suffering would last their entire lives. They had lost all semblance of being human, though they hadn't been to begin with, but were now mere dogs to be tortured forever. Kurama enjoyed the little things in life, torturing dark souls and breaking the girls who delighted in them. Chapter 11. The mother and daughter of House Tyrell had been out of commission for so long, Naruto had left a contingent to keep the two occupied for a while. By placing his own clones outside, forced to appear as guards, Naruto knew he would soon be enjoying those memories. But for the matter at hand, Ned had been kind enough to enter Naruto into the tournament. It would be a great place to show off his skills. He was eager for a fight, and who better to go against the supposedly greatest knights in the kingdom? There was the monstrous Mountain, who wielded strength rivaling a beast clothed in the image of man. Then the king's two guardians, Sir Barristan the Bold, and the Kingslayer himself, would have fun humiliating his lover's twin. Speaking of which, I could sense through her clones that Cersei was doing an admirable job entertaining her doppelgangers. She was being tagged along and giving as well as she received. Caitlin also wasn't hunching over and covering her surprisingly young and noble body in cream. Shaking himself from those thoughts, Naruto set to work preparing for the joust. There was already a coincidence of the tournament, a low-level knight who had just been elevated to squire. It just so happened that he was the squire of the late hand of the king. Naruto didn't believe in coincidences. Now he had a new reason to tame the mountain. The man, if you were being kind, was a monster through and through. He had not the slightest idea of kindness or humanity. All that was inside was a demon. He would rape innocent women and mutilate children. This beast would soon join his victims. Naruto had big plans for the monster. Gregor had spotted the blonde-haired youth and sneered at the hateful glare shot his way. He would enjoy gutting that cute boy. The next joust featured Naruto against a low-class knight, the young shinobi using only an ounce of his formidable strength and throwing the rider to the ground with ease. Tilting his helmet toward the tearful simpleton, Naruto continued to look at the remaining participants. Kingslayer and Barristan didn't disappoint, easily advancing to the final rounds, as well as the mountain. The day's final just would feature Kingslayer versus Barristan, while Naruto had the distinct honor of humiliating the beast. The two knights exchanged several lances before the older knight capitalized on the younger's slight inexperience. Then, it would be Sir Barristan the Bold who would fight for the joust in the finals. Now all that remained was who would win the final joust. Most of the crowd had the younger man dying or begging for alms from the beast known as the Mountain. Naruto was all too familiar with being the underdog and being underestimated by others. He would show this world filled with ignorant men and women who would truly rule them from this day forward. Naruto hefted his spear and lowered his helmet. Gregor didn't think it was even wise to wear a helmet. He was certain he would crush this boy with his brute strength. The two men urged their horses forward and met in a mighty clash of wood and steel. Gregor had thrust his spear with all his might into Naruto's body, but all it did was crash like so many waves against the rocks. Naruto had endured the blow without a sound and returned the blow with his own spear, which pierced Gregor through the seams of his armor. The spear, imbued with his own chakra, easily broke the steel and lodged itself in his right bicep. The Mountain roared furiously from the wound, but all Naruto did was gallop off and grab another spear. The crowd was amazed by the young man's prowess, and soon cheered for the boy to defeat the beast. Laughing at the turn of events, Naruto arrogantly tilted his helmet at the furious man and waited for the next charge. Bristling with anger at the humiliation and pain, Gregor roared for another spear and charged at Naruto with abandon. Naruto easily dodged the clumsy thrust and went back through the mountain, but now he had his other arm. The man was devoid of both arms and had no means to continue, but he would not be humiliated any further. Jumping off his mare, Gregor raced to attack the young man and crush him, but Naruto had been expecting this. Now he could really get to work humiliating and disfiguring this beast. Swinging from his own steed, Naruto met the older man in hand-to-hand combat. Grabbing the man, Naruto applied pressure to the wounds and actually made the once proud man scream. Gregor was beyond reason, and the pain was making him even angrier. With an agility that belied his massive form, Gregor caught Naruto and began squeezing the life out of the young man. Or at least he tried to. Naruto had faced enemies that would make Gregor look like a kitten. He wouldn't be mistreated by this horror. Deciding to end this once and for all, Naruto broke free from the man and took his arm in his hands. He began to pull slowly, and it soon became apparent that he would tear the limb from Gregor's body. Tendons began to tear from the hole Naruto had created with his spear. And soon Gregor would have to handle everything with one hand, because his right arm now belonged to Naruto. Using his own hand to punch the brute, Naruto only stopped when Gregor was no longer among the conscious. The blood rushing through his ears and the adrenaline from beating the man senseless had kept the roar of the crowd from his senses. He had brought down the monster many hadn't thought possible, plus a large number of the audience had grievances with the beast. Soaked in the cheers of the crowd, Naruto bowed theatrically to the king and headed back to his tent to wash up for the match with Barristan the Bold. Several silent sisters had come to pull it out of the mountain, but its bulk was too much for them and they had to ask for help from the many battered knights of the kingdom. Robert couldn't believe the boy had ripped the giant's arm off and beaten him to a pulp. The man was resilient and would survive the ordeal, but he would never again be the terror of the kingdom. If he was being honest with himself, Robert had never liked the mountain. He was a wild animal with only one instinct: to kill and plunder everything in the name of Lannister. With Gregor out of commission, that left a valuable piece taken from the old lion. Robert was starting to like this young man. He reminded him of himself, even though he wasn't as burly or wielding a powerful hammer. The next match would be Barristan against the youth. If you had told him an 18-year-old youth would be in the final of the joust, he would have slapped you and called you crazy. But it had happened, and now the greatest knight of his generation was about to face the blonde upstart. Naruto had been waiting for this ever since the list was shown on the board. He wanted to test his mettle against the greatest swordsman in this land. Though he might have to hold back his strength, the old man wasn't like that monster. He was more of a fighter of finesse. The two plunged their spears in respect for each other, Barristan for the young man's amazing skill, and Naruto for the old man's longevity. The midday sun was scorching the audience, but all the two felt was the adrenaline rush that only their lives could bring to the game. With an imperceptible nod, the two titans mounted their steeds with fervent excitement, and readied their lances for the force of the tilt. It didn't disappoint. Both landed solid blows on their foes, but they were left with no lasting damage to their respective armor. Naruto had seen the way Barristan had leaned back slightly to resist his thrust, otherwise he would surely have been sent flying from his horse. Naruto had done the same, though it wasn't necessary. Sir Barristan wasn't the force Gregor had been. This game continued with 4 more spears, each one breaking as it slipped from the more heavily armored chest plates. Naruto was enjoying himself. He hadn't expected the old man to last this long. Even though he had dulled his powers, he still intended to disarm the old man. But each time, Barristan would read him correctly and dodge in time. Naruto would definitely keep the idiot to train his army when he conquered this world. The crowd was nervous about the way the finals were going, cheering both competitors and acknowledging the entertainment they had provided. Robert was beside himself with envy at the chance to butt heads again, but his rotund exterior wouldn't be able to get on horses, let alone joust with them. Deciding he had had enough fun for the afternoon, Naruto brought out his considerable skill and indicated to Barristan that this would be the final bow. The veteran knight could see the renewed vigor and strength Naruto had gained. The young man stood taller in the saddle and seemed unaffected by the afternoon's activities. Smirking at the young man, Barristan truly lived up to his nickname, and bravely charged once more at the youth who eluded him. This final clash ushered in a deafening clash of steel and wood, but now only one sat atop his steed. Naruto had unseated the veteran and won the joust. With a thunderous roar, the crowd shouted their approval of the young man and also applauded the wizened knight's efforts. Jumping out of his chair, Naruto approached Barristan and extended a hand in greeting and friendship. Slightly shaken by the ordeal, Barristan nevertheless took the offered hand and greeted the young man warmly. "Well known, and with whom do I have the pleasure of fighting?" "Naruto, sir, I am a vassal of House Stark." Surprised that such a powerful man was under Ned Stark's command, Barristan would have to be careful with the Starks. They had a major chess piece in this Game of Thrones. Although the knight would have liked to know more about the young man, Robert called the two together and awarded the young man the purse of 10,000 golden dragons. The crowd again shouted its approval of the events that had occurred, and soon the tournament descended into a free-for-all. With the tournament over, Naruto slipped into the shadows to celebrate in his own way with the rest of his family. Caitlyn and Cersei had finally cleaned up after their marathon session with Naruto's clones, and welcomed the teenager back to their pavilion with open arms. They had heard of his remarkable achievements in the tournament, and were amazed by the stories of his utter savagery against the mountain. After the savagery of the tournament, Naruto was open to more pleasant sensations from his lovers. The two had just cleaned up after their own fun, but her wet hair and supple skin called to Naruto. The two had grown more and more beautiful as the days passed, Naruto's chakra beneficial to both of them. They hadn't felt this alive in years. Naruto wasn't the only one ready for some fun, and the stories of her battle prowess reminded them of her prowess in the bedroom. All that stamina and strength would be welcomed in the coming night, because while Robert and his royal court entertained themselves after their stunning victory, Naruto was going to dive deep into Queen and Lady Stark. Unraveling his armor, Naruto asked the girls for help removing the heavy objects. They were very eager to start another round. Standing in front of them in only his robes and pants, Naruto took the opportunity to look at the two women. They were both on their night shifts, hanging loosely tied up and showing off their amazing legs and perky backsides. He was moaning at the way their butts were begging to be touched, taking each woman in his hands and slowly massaging their perky derrieres. Soft and supple, he was making the two of them grab him for support as he played with them. Soon, Caitlyn slid down his body and got on her knees to remove his rear end and reach the monster inside. She wasn't disappointed and soon had the beast in her hands. It was as large as the clones before. Stroking it tenderly, Caitlyn slowly began to lick up and down. She was becoming more lewd the longer she was with Naruto. Soon she was bobbing her head up and down as much as she could. He reached deep into her throat, grabbed her hair, and guided the action. Cersei wasn't left out and was soon on the floor with Caitlyn and kissing and licking him along with Lady Stark. With the two of them at it, Naruto couldn't last long and soon had cream all over their faces and in their luscious hair. Licking up their essence, The two soon began licking the rest off each other and making it into a deliriously hot makeout session. Naruto retained his stamina and was ready to go again, creating 2 clones to occupy his nether lips. Naruto had the 2 continue licking him. They created a vice by pressing her breasts together. It felt like the warmest glove around her. Pumping in and out of both of them, and using her breasts for his pleasure, it was the life any man in the 7 kingdoms would desire. Cersei and Caitlyn were completely devoted to him, and he to them, but no one could have foreseen that the queen of the realm would be so completely dominated by a seemingly young man. With a moan of pleasure, the 2 women reached their climax, sending the 2 clones over the edge with the pressure on their lower lips. As the clones filled the 2 to the brim below, Naruto soon followed them into their heavenly valleys. Milking him for all they were worth, the 2 welcomed the splashes on their faces and chests. There was more than enough to give them both 3 coats each. They were painted white and loved every minute. Every gasp made them catch milk in their mouths and hair. They swallowed as best they could, but it was in vain, and soon their stomachs were swollen with their favorite treat. Placing the 2 on top of each other, Naruto entered their lower lips and rubbed them together. They could feel him between them, and he was hitting the right spots to get them going again. Soon they were as wet as possible. Naruto alternated between the 2 and thrust as deeply into them as he could. They were stretched to their limits, but soon accommodated to the teen's girth. As he thrust in and out of both of them, he could see their eyes rolling to the back of their heads and their faces slack in a picture of being bucked stupid. Riding them both with abandon, Naruto unleashed multiple releases on the women, and they were soon used as sleeves for him. With a few final thrusts, he painted the insides of both of them with his essence and refilled their stomachs. Crawling up to their faces, Naruto allowed himself to release the rest of it on their faces as they licked it automatically. Painting the 2 of them was becoming an incredible hobby for the teen. He really enjoyed them. Chapter 12. Naruto was walking through the new area where most of the nobles had been sectioned off. What he had found there was enough to make him believe in angels. There lounging around was someone who looked stunning. Looks up at Lindsay Pellis, lying there showing off her generous chest. She was an angel, and Naruto would have her. Casually walking up to the buxom blonde, Naruto slipped into the conversation and tried to get her attention. She quickly became engrossed in the blonde hero. Of course, she'd heard of his exploits. There was no one in the kingdom who didn't know of his absolute dominance against the mountain. She soon had her settled into her pavilion, more than eager to charm the blonde at her side. She was the daughter of one of the kingdom's many lesser lords, but her beauty had been known throughout the realm. She hadn't guaranteed anyone else would be worthy of her talents, but this hero would do quite well for her ambitions. Naruto didn't care that she wasn't everything she cracked up to be. All he saw was an angel he had to have now. Unfortunately for him, or fortunately, it was all a matter of opinion. The blonde bombshell had a friend who would walk into his shop unannounced. Searches for Abigail Ratchford. "Lindsay, what are you doing locked in here?" Abigail soon had her answer when she saw how tightly trapped Naruto was by the buxom blonde. "Oh, who do we have here? The hero of the tournament? What could you possibly be doing here?" Naruto was speechless. Another angel had descended from heaven, and she was a slut too. The reward wasn't fair. She'd have it all soon enough. Lindsay wasn't about to share her claim and seemed to want Abigail to return to wherever she came from. Unfortunately for Lindsay, Naruto wasn't of the same opinion and led Abigail deeper into the store. Creating numerous clones outside the tent, Naruto mentally ordered them not to allow anyone to enter the room. The 2 continued to send heated glances to each other when Naruto decided to show the girls what he was really made of. The intense heat in the room increased even more, and the girls were sweating profusely. Naruto had charged the room with his chakra and heated it enough for the women to remove their clothes. It helped that there was a perfect specimen in front of them to strip. Lindsay would win this if she had to do whatever it took, taking off her clothes. Lindsay walked sensually toward the blonde and dragged him onto the bed. She hovered over him with her generous bosom, trailing kisses down his chest. She would win this and gain fame and fortune through the hero. What she couldn't know was that there were many who had already been tamed by the blonde. Abigail didn't like where this was going, so she got in on the fun by stripping down as well, revealing her massive breasts. She snuggled up to Naruto and tucked his right arm into her valley. She was making him thrust into her lower lips, slowly dragging her nubile body against his. Naruto was having fun but decided to even the odds a little, creating numerous doppelgangers. Naruto soon had the two restrained and under his influence. By removing their remaining underwear, Naruto didn't give them a moment to wonder about the numerous clones. He had already claimed all of their lips for his own and was slowly licking their nether lips. It was causing countless amounts of pleasure in the two of them, and soon had them climaxing together. Licking up their juices, Naruto spread himself thin and they were all eager to use their sensual mouths to suck him dry. Stroking the two, one with blonde locks and the other with dark locks, Naruto moved in sync and rode their mouths. Depositing his seed into their waiting throats, Naruto watched as they spurted from the amount. He filled them to the max and soon coated their hair and face in his seed. Abigail was having trouble understanding how this happened. One moment she was stroking the blonde, the next he was riding her mouth and using her head as a handle for his hands. Moaning at the taste, Abigail nonetheless wanted to salvage some of her dignity. Unfortunately for her, Naruto had stamina for days. Lindsay wasn't much better. Naruto continued to ride her mouth and was working her mouth like his own personal sleeve. The two of them were being bucked in the worst way possible, but Naruto didn't care. He signaled his clones to switch with him, and now he could get to the main event. Their perky, juicy little asses were calling out to be bucked into oblivion. Positioning himself between their cheeks, Naruto slowly rubbed his seed over the two horny girls. He was lubing them up well, making sure they were ready for his girth. Though it should be said, no matter how many times he rode Caitlyn and Cersei, they always felt tight and full. The two women tried to protest the new developments, but they were a bit too busy trying to breathe around the clones. Naruto slid between the two and sighed in ecstasy. They enveloped him and the clone in warmth and tension. Naruto was soon rocking into them with a steady rhythm, but was surprised to see that they both still had their virginities. He relaxed and signaled for his clones to stop, but he waited until they were both so enthralled by the pleasure that they would allow him to take their virginity. With a gentle infusion of his chakra, they both released themselves onto him. The stimulation was causing incalculable sensations they'd never felt before. Now they were rebelling against Naruto, and he knew they were ready. With a more powerful thrust that broke their virginity together, they both moaned fruitlessly against the clones in their mouths. With the added vibrations, the clones drenched them with more of their seed. Inhaling Naruto's musk, Lindsay and Abigail were completely wrecked and bucked silly. Entering and exiting the two, Naruto was having the time of his life. He would definitely gift his father countless lands when he became king. They should have everything their hearts desired. Right now, that was more than his share of his seed. Filling them up front and back, the two looked a little worse for wear. By painting them white from top to bottom, Naruto wasn't even halfway done with what he wanted to do. He coated Abigail's ass with his seed and lined himself up with her bud. Slowly impaling her, Naruto could see the silent scream that Abigail was moaning around her clone. She took it like a champ and soon had half his shaft in her. Pounding her bubble butt, Naruto thrust in and out of the brunette and really made a fine impression on her ass. Her ass bounced and jiggled with abandon, and he was more than happy to hold on for dear life as he rode her raw. Naruto wasn't about to forget Lindsay and creamed her ass as well, trying to get her nice and lubricated for the task ahead. Slowly sliding in, Lindsay also moaned around the clone, but she was a little more boisterous about it. The vibrations were ecstatic for the clones and filled the girls again. Soon their wombs were dilated from all the seed. The sounds in the tent were of an entire clan in heat, but it was just Naruto and the two beautiful women. Slapping and slurping, all sorts of sexual positions. Both women were drunk on his seed and the amount of pleasure they had experienced. Naruto wasn't finished with them by any means. He had them rubbing against each other and really getting into the swing of things. The blonde and brunette really got their juices flowing, and they were both quite happy to swallow it all. Soon they were crushed together and Naruto and his clone mounted them from behind. Their ample breasts crushed against each other, and the feel of their slick nubile bodies was making them moan incoherently. They were too far gone. Lindsay had assumed she could mold the hero into her little puppet. She had done this before, albeit without the raucous lovemaking, but with her good looks and sexual charm it was easy to get men to go at each other. What she hadn't counted on was Naruto's virility and tenacity. Plus, he had a huge reserve to give her everything she could handle and more. She wouldn't be a pet that could be controlled, now it would be the other way around. He was the dominant one, and she would be his pet. He was really playing with her generous chest, Naruto riding her tight ass and using her breast as a hand grip. Breaking her ass with his insistent thrusting and chakra-enhanced fingers that made her body feel amazing. Her eyes were rolling into the back of her head and her tongue was lolling out, being bucked silly. Naruto thought her delicate lips were too lonely, and soon had her servicing another clone. She could only smell Naruto's musk and there was no stopping the deluge of seed filling her mouth and stomach. She was completely covered from head to toe in the material. Abigail had the same idea as Lindsay, but again, she ran into the wrong person. Her brown hair was white with seeds, and her lips were wrapped around Naruto's. Both her lips, bottom and top. She was giving it her best shot, but Naruto had too much energy to keep up. He was thrusting into her from the front and back and was truly living up to his nickname of being the most unpredictable ninja in Konoha. He had her at every different angle he could think of. Her chest was being humped by her clone as he screwed her face with abandon. He would test her conscience by thrusting into her plump ass with sharp thrusts. She would appear and disappear from the experience of her life. Her hair was silky soft, and he was more than happy to give her the conditioner he would use from now on. Having the two of them side by side was a good comparison of their talents. Abigail had the bounciest ass, but Lindsay wasn't lacking in the breast department. He would ride them for the rest of the day. Their moans were music to his ears, and the way they continued to call his name every time they clenched around him had Naruto filling them to the brim. Having them folded just right gave him an unobstructed view of their perky, juicy derrieres. Naruto had forgotten the time, and it was almost sunset when he decided to finish with a flourish. Conjuring enough clones to ravage 10 women, Naruto ordered them to spit on the two and give them generous helpings of powerful stimulants. Soon they were moaning and groaning around the clones, filling themselves again and again, each clone disappearing when its deed was done. Soon there was more seed than the women could handle, and they were simply rolling in it. Taking charge, Naruto entered Lindsay and was soon joined by another, as he took her lower lips and another took her back and mouth. She was truly and completely filled and wasn't headed toward any tomorrow. Her plans had crumbled around her, but it seemed that was the furthest thing from her mind as she continued to lick and suck with abandon. Naruto had truly gained another for his harem. He would have to congratulate the Lord for raising such a wonderful angel. Abigail had seen Lindsay's full treatment, and was dripping at the thought that she was next. One of the clones had already filled her backdoor, and another had slid past her nether lips, but the original had the honor of painting her mouth and face. With a roar of pleasure, Naruto finished Lindsay and moved closer to Abigail. Grabbing her brown locks, he slowly wrapped her around himself, and wiped away the residual juices. With the semi-cleaning done, Naruto offered himself to Abigail, and she was more than ready to receive him. She licked up and down and sucked as best she could. She was in heaven in the warm confines of her mouth and throat. She was truly a cop and took it in stride. She was already filled to the max with the other two inside her. All she could do was keep pumping into Naruto. The constant rocking motion helped lessen the urge to rock against Naruto. He kept her head still as he plunged into her depths. All she could smell was his musk and his seed. She happily lapped up the torrent of cream filling her mouth. With a final roar, the three blondes emptied their loads into Abigail, filling her like a balloon. She was leaking from every hole in her body. The amount Naruto had given her was enough protein for a week. And that was just the amount in her mouth, as the three pulled out of the brunette and painted her white from the tips of her hair to the soles of her feet. She was in the same situation as Lindsay, lying in a pool of her own juices and Naruto's seed. Finally satisfied, Naruto had to clean up his angels and take them back to the Red Keep. It wouldn't do to find the two beauties sleeping off their seed. Though that could be a story for another time, as both Lindsay and Abigail curled up next to him and lazily sucked out any little seed that had escaped them. They were well and truly screwed. Chapter 13. Lindsay and Abigail were devastated by the efforts of Westeros' resident ninja. He ran his network of spies and informants while attacking them with sheer abandon. Naruto didn't have to rely on second-hand accounts. He could mass-produce enough clones to flood the city and countryside, the best information, all for the price of a minor headache now and then. He could see that the king and queen were presiding over a knighting ceremony, but it didn't interest him in the slightest. Tangling his hand in Abigail's hair, Naruto guided her up and down, and soon filled her to the brim with his seed. She gulped impatiently as he received reports that Baelish was trying to get his seedy little brothels up and running again. Naruto had to give it to the man. He didn't know when to give up, but some clones would be taking over the brothel soon enough. Taking out the merchandise usually closed any kind of business, but when Naruto's doppelgangers took the girls and stuck Baelish's nose in it too, it really showed the man how little Naruto thought of him. Baelish was beside himself with rage. He couldn't believe some upstart had taken 80% of his business in a few weeks. The unknown assailant had run off with the girls of Lys and Pentos. They were hard to come by. He'd lose an arm and a leg for those girls, though whether that meant literally or figuratively was up to interpretation. Most of the people he dealt with didn't take kindly to those who didn't keep their end of the bargain. With fewer and fewer girls to attract the lords of Westeros, Peter was becoming strict about the amount of gold he could send to his suppliers. Not to mention the amount of his fortune stolen by the audacious monster who had terrorized him less than 2 weeks ago. Humiliating men was one of Naruto's favorite pastimes, although he could think of many others that gave him more pleasure. While he was preoccupied with Baelish's petty schemes, Naruto hadn't seen Cersei enter her chambers. The queen wasn't surprised to see the blondes entertaining guests, but she was surprised to see that they were the daughters of some of the wealthiest members of the merchant class. It made her feel a little self-conscious when she compared her body to Lindsay's, but she was tenser in the right areas again. Whatever the secret to the blonde ninja's power, his essence actually turned back the clock on the women he infected. Cersei had felt younger and more vibrant each time she'd copulated with the teen. It helped that Naruto doused her from head to toe in the stuff, but she wasn't going to complain about the added benefits of the cream. Naruto's clones were filling Lindsay like a piñata, filling her stomach to the brim. But that was something to reflect on later. Cersei had come to talk to the teenager about Ned Stark's ongoing investigation into her children. Naruto had heard Cersei as Abigail sucked happily. "So Lord Stark hasn't let this go?" "No, he didn't. You have to do something. I won't let my children be executed because of some hick from the north." Now, my queen, there's no need to insult him. After all, his wife will soon become your sister." Cersei knew of the extenuating circumstances with Naruto, but she didn't like being reminded of it. Caitlyn had become something of a confidant to Cersei, and Naruto wouldn't have the two of them fight when he became king. Deciding to dismiss this argument before it got too heated, Naruto switched with another of his clones and ordered them to exhaust the two beauties while he attended to Lord Stark. "I'll talk to the man and I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement. The only solution I can see is if he takes the black. We can't allow him to spout his nonsense in the capital. Besides, this will be a great opportunity for him to cement his place in Caitlyn's life." Naruto had always known Ned would be trouble. It didn't help that he was the husband of his illicit lover. Caitlyn loved the man dearly, but Naruto had given her too much and truly bonded her to his side. Naruto didn't want to cause her pain and had to find a way to save the honorable idiot without compromising his secrets. "I will do my best to resolve this peacefully. Please return to your chambers, my queen." Cersei pouted at the dismissal, but knew better than to overstep her boundaries with Naruto. While he was sometimes a carefree and foolish young man, he could become quite terrifying when he wanted to be. Walking towards the Stark section of the Red Keep, Naruto wondered how best to approach the subject of the Queen's children. Unfortunately for him, Lord Stark had also been looking for him. "Naruto, it's good that I've been looking for you. Caitlyn had said that she needed to speak with you about something to do with the cooking cream. I don't know what she was talking about, but she insisted that you see her as soon as possible." Chuckling softly, Naruto knew his little kitty had been without his cream for a long time. The more they made love, the stronger the bond they formed. "Of course, my lord. But before I go, may I ask where you're going in such a hurry?" "Labor, Something to do with the royal line. Oh, and what's that about? Ned wasn't about to reveal any secrets about the royal lineage to Naruto, but the young man seemed to be blocking his way. Private business, Naruto, please step aside. I must get on with this business quickly. Naruto had tried the subtle approach but hadn't gotten anywhere, so he sighed and appeared behind the Guardian of the North to incapacitate him. Ned didn't know what hit him. 1 minute he was trying to get around Naruto, the next all he saw was darkness. Creating a series of clones to deal with Ned, Naruto made his way to Caitlyn and learned how eager she was to see him. The clones would distract Ned while he entertained Caitlyn. Naruto didn't quite know what to do with Ned for now. Hopefully, nothing too troubling was on the horizon. Things often changed pretty quickly in Westeros. As Naruto rode Caitlyn all night and day, there was a plot to kill the king. The bloated old walrus was drinking too much liquor and was so drunk that he couldn't dodge the boar that attacked him. For all he was worth, Robert gave it his all and killed the beast with a mighty stab. Now the king of the kingdom lay in bed, bleeding to death from being gored by the piglet. The maesters could do nothing for their king due to the amount of blood lost and the size of the tear in his stomach. They gathered the key members of the small council, but were unable to find Ned or the queen. Cersei was being roasted in one of the many lonely towers of the Red Keep. Naruto had informed her of Lord Stark's arrest, and she was more than welcome to reward the teen. He was pounding her with abandon while his clone filled her mouth with horniness, slobbering all over it like a dog with a bone. Ned was held under genjutsu and was not heard from for some time. Naruto didn't want to leave the man on the sidelines, but his stubbornness toward the cause was too much to bear. Naruto would fix this kingdom from within, especially within the kingdom's women. Thus, the small council decided to let the king spend his last hours in pain-free bliss while they ordered Milk of the Poppy to escort him to his next adventure. Although the queen and Ned were unaware of the sudden loss of her husband/king, Naruto had heard about it and decided to let it go. With Robert out of the way, he could truly guide the queen toward what she wanted to do. She was already his. Now he had to convince his children how well he could rule the kingdom. Although Joffrey would be a little different, Naruto had plans for the cruel king. The boy would not enjoy the trials he would go through. Naruto only held Ned with genjutsu to distract him. Joffrey, on the other hand, would feel the full power of Kurama when Naruto handed the boy over to him. Kurama had said that Joffrey wasn't much better than that Bolton duo, though Kurama had enjoyed breaking both men. Now those two were just laundresses for Kurama to maim and torture to his heart's content. Miranda fit nicely into Kurama's plans. She was pregnant and floated spectacularly. Kurama would crush her until there was no more challenge in the girl, though from the way she sucked and thrust against Kurama, she was long gone. Having his consciousness split in so many places, Naruto returned it to the clones who were piercing Abigail and Lindsay's daylights. He had spoken with his fathers, and they were delighted that his daughters had smitten the young tournament hero. Their influence in the upper echelons of the Red Keep would allow them to become even more powerful and wealthy by siding with the crown. Abigail was sucking like there was candy on Naruto, though she compared the gift she received to her favorite sweets. Pumping her from behind, the clone injected enough seed into her belly to swell. She soon doubled that as she swallowed the load Naruto had pumped into her mouth and down her esophagus. Smearing the rest of his cum around the woman, Naruto moved over to Lindsay and switched with the clone drilling into her ass. He thrust into her all at once, and she completely surrounded the other clone with her sweet lips. Naruto thrust in and out and slapped her beautiful ass hard enough to leave a mark, her plump reddened bottom begging to be pounded. Screaming his name, Lindsay had the clone in her mouth fill it to the brim with more of her new favorite drink. With her rosebud like a vice on his member, Naruto soon entered the blonde and filled her from behind as well, before splashing the rest into her golden curls falling down her back. Both were exhausted but gave no quarter and soon aligned themselves once more to serve the needs of their new king. With the queen, Cersei was reeling from the marathon session in which she'd gotten engaged to Naruto and was about to arrive when Naruto delivered the news that lifted her spirits. The pig was dead. There would be no more need to pretend. Now she could groom her little boy to rule the kingdom, but would Naruto allow it? Cersei had no illusions about how powerful the teenager was. He could easily steal the seat from her, and her son. Though she wouldn't need to steal it anytime soon, the way he pleased and broke her, she was tempted to simply be his slave. He had said she was one of his loves, but with the way he carried on, who could know? While she was idle due to the amount of pleasure she had received at Naruto's hands, she wasn't foolish enough to truly believe she could beat the teenager. Naruto had all the pieces, and she was just another pawn in his master plan to rule Westeros. Though with the pig dead, Joffrey would be king, and that could set up some delicious moves for the worn-out queen. She had always known the day would come when Joffrey would ascend the throne and she would rule from the shadows behind him. Joffrey had changed quite a bit from the happy girl of her youth to something even she struggled to recognize. Was there any way to curb his cruel and sadistic tendencies? Or would the boy continue to wreak havoc wherever he went in this world? It pained him to watch his little boy grow into this hideous monster. Perhaps there was something Naruto could do about it. Naruto had been lazily sawing along Cersei's plump backside as he contemplated how to deliver the news of Joffrey's apparent accident. The boy had fallen down some stairs and suffered severe head trauma that would need to be examined by the finest healers in the world. Though in reality, Naruto had already put Joffrey under a deep genjutsu. He would be learning firsthand what it was like to be a monster. Kurama wouldn't mind educating the young, and that would allow Tommen to be the new face of the kingdom. Well, in name only, after all, Naruto would wait for the right moment to usurp the throne. He had signs of a true terror north of the wall, and if it coincided with the new regime change, so much the better for him. Hours later, Cersei had been distraught by the news of her eldest son, but she was comforted by Naruto's ministrations. It was hard to keep anything on her mind when Naruto was pushing you out of your head. At least the boy would be in a happy sleep state, or so Naruto had told her. She didn't have to tell him every little detail of her arrangement with Kurama. With Joffrey out of the picture, it was now Tommen's turn to rule the roost. As it turned out, he had a great advisor in his mother and confidant, the tournament hero Naruto Uzumaki. Though Tommen was a little suspicious of Naruto's closeness to his mother, Cersei had put him at ease knowing the hero was taking the utmost care of her. The small council was baffled by the way Naruto had inundated himself in the upper echelons of power. He had seduced the queen and the heir apparent. There was no way to prevent the younglings from receiving the reins of the kingdom. The hand of the king was nowhere to be seen, and Baelish didn't have the influence or wealth to deter the hero. Both Baelish and Varys would have to bide their time and wait for mistakes that would allow them to bend the boy to their way of thinking. Unfortunately for them, they wouldn't be around to see that day because Naruto would surely deal with both of them in the coming months of his reign. Tommen was the king, but Naruto held all the power as the king's chief counsel. Bucking the queen had other perks besides bucking one of the most beautiful women in the kingdom. Tommen had no idea about his demotion at Naruto's king's behest, but he would soon come to see it Naruto's way. With the power of the throne and the wealth provided to him by the merchants and House Lannister, Naruto had all the ingredients necessary for his insidious rise to the throne. One of the first acts of his power was to repeal the order to kill Daenerys Targaryen. Instead, he would welcome the new queen to the realm. The small council wasn't about to take this lying down. They listed a long list of reasons why the order was still in place, ranging from her usurping the throne to the very real possibility of all-out war if she ever returned to Westeros. Unfortunately for them, Naruto didn't care what the small council thought about the issue and rammed it down their throats anyway. It also didn't help when Daenerys Targaryen magically appeared in front of the throne. She had lied, waiting for Naruto's signal to enter the throne room. Daenerys was kind in her first appearance at court, but many in the court called for her head and ordered the guards to take her to the black cells. Naruto easily reversed that order and had the men retreat while apologizing to the young woman. No one could believe how easily Naruto adapted to his new power. Guided Daenerys to the throne, Naruto stood her at his right hand as the people in the room gasped for air from the amount of killing intent Naruto was flooding the room with. The small council took the brunt of the abuse. Naruto was going to relish the day he would dismantle the council and tear the members to pieces for drowning the kingdom in their petty squabbles that killed and maimed thousands of commoners. Tommen could see the power Naruto had wielded, intimidating the many detractors and silencing the room without a word. He was becoming more certain than ever that Naruto would be the true master behind the scenes. When his mother had first told him Naruto would be his advisor, Tommen had been thrilled that the tournament hero would help him rule the kingdom. But after meeting the young man, it was obvious he wouldn't be ruling anything. Tommen hadn't been blessed with strength or wit, but even he knew when to throw in the towel. He would play king for as long as his mother saw fit to allow him, but the true king would be at his right hand. With most of his business completed, Naruto signaled for the audience to leave the throne room as he needed to consult with the king and the mother regent. Cersei knew Naruto controlled the kingdom now, but she was furious at Daenerys Targaryen's entrance. Not only that, but Naruto was protecting her. "What the hell is going on, Naruto? You play with Tommen and now you bring this traitor among us." "Calm down, my queen, I didn't mean to worry you unnecessarily. Daenerys is here under my protection and will join the royal family." "Like hell he will. I demand that you remove his head this instant." Daenerys wasn't about to let that happen and forced her way towards Cersei, intent on strangling the mother regent. Fortunately, Naruto stepped between the two and declared that there would be no execution for either side. "There will be no more bloodshed between the Targaryens and the Lannisters. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial agreement between the two." Judging by the murder in her eyes, it wasn't likely to happen anytime soon. Leaving the room, Daenerys headed to the master bedroom to cool off from the bloodlust she had for the family that had usurped her throne and murdered her family. "How could you do this to me? What's going on, Mom? Why is she here?" "Don't worry, darling, I'll get his head soon." "No, you won't. I told you she's under my protection and everything that entails." There wasn't a soldier alive in this world who could harm Naruto, or any member of his family. It seemed his little surprise hadn't gone down well with the royal family, but Naruto had always known this showdown would have to be resolved eventually. "I don't understand why you would need her when you already have us. She'll ruin everything you and I have worked for. Can't you see that? I know you are wary of her, but I assure you that she will be a vital piece in our continued reign of the kingdom. With her support we can truly unite the kingdom and end all these petty disputes that break out across the 7 kingdoms." Shaking her head, Cersei returned to her chambers and wondered once more if it had been the right idea to let Naruto lead this kingdom. Wasn't it long ago that she was queen and he was merely a flirt? Perhaps it was time things went back to the way they were. A little darkness never hurt anyone, did it, Naruto? Cersei was returning. Chapter 14. After the spectacle in the throne room, the events became the talk of King's Landing. Daenerys returned to the kingdom usurped by Robert, her sudden protection of the realm's hero. It was all starting to make sense to the small council. They had been completely and truly fooled by the blonde teenager. He may have seemed like an innocent, happy teenager, but in reality, he had all the cunning and brutality of someone 3 times his age. Naruto had taken power from the throne and forged great things with it, whether it was the new orphanages or the multitude of hygienic fixes for the horrible living conditions of both the poor and the rich. The nobles had never smelled so good in their lives, though some of their daughters and wives were missing, but that was a small price to pay for actually smelling like some of those Tyrell brats. Baelish was beside himself with rage over the events that had transpired in the throne room, hoping the king's passing would be an occasion for his ambition to rise again. But the young man had overtaken him and usurped both the queen mother and her simple-minded son. That boy couldn't have been just some country bumpkin who fell into Stark's lap. He must have been planning this all along. But how had he curried favor with so many of the main players in this farcical game? With his business in ruins and his plans in disarray, Baelish had only one avenue left for his pleasure. The main brothel hadn't been attacked and was still generating a meager stipend from the establishment, though it was far less than it had been before. Nobles of all shapes and sizes had been absent from their brothels. There were the occasional commoner, but most didn't fill the coffers like the whales once had. Baelish was under assault from 2 fronts: the boy who had crushed his ambition for all-out war in the kingdom, and the man decimating his dirty business in the capital. Arriving at his only oasis from his life's troubles, Baelish settled into his office to receive a relaxing massage and inspect his wares. What he hadn't counted on was seeing the devil who was destroying his business plowing through his most beautiful courtesans. Naruto had known about the worm's main establishment for a long time, but he'd waited for the right moment to crush his only joy in life. The man had wanted to start a war that would have devastated the kingdom for years. Also, he could become king without getting his hands dirty. Naruto had created numerous clones to entertain the girls as he slowly made his way toward Baelish. The form of the hulking monstrosity of a man was useful for instilling true fear in the worm. Though he might have lost some of his luster with one of the list girls still attached to his pelvic region. She had been one of the most vocal girls and wouldn't be stopping any time soon as she rode his giant. "Littlefinger, how's your business? I hear business is slow." Baelish was beside himself. Not only was the beast destroying his business, but he was also thoroughly bucking all his girls so that they screamed in ecstasy. "How dare you show your face here? I should have gold cloaks come, beat you with chains, and cut off your head." "Oh, I wouldn't hold my breath for that. I had my men arrest most of them, and the others who were too mischievous were thrown into the canal without their heads." Baelish knew the monster wasn't lying from the silence outside its walls. There would be no golden-armored saviors today. "What do you want? You've ruined me and taken everything that's mine. What have I done to deserve this charade?" Naruto laughed darkly at the worm. "Your very presence is an affront to me. Your many devious schemes and manipulations have sown your fate. If you hadn't seen fit to toy with people's lives like pieces on a board, this lesson would not be necessary. Unfortunately, it is deemed necessary, and I now advise you to take what meager belongings you can carry and leave this city. Leave and never return, or I will show you what a true monster I can be." Without another word, Naruto grabbed the weak man and threw him across the room toward one of its ornate walls. The worm's painful sob had broken a few ribs from the impact. Limping with his arm hanging loose at his side, Baelish hurried to his office to gather what he could for the arduous journey ahead. He'd been thoroughly beaten, but let it never be said that Littlefinger gave up too soon. He would bide his time, return richer and more powerful than before, and wipe that monster from the world. With Littlefinger out of the way for a long time, Naruto could focus on the more troublesome members of this kingdom. With Daenerys' announcement, and her unorthodox control over the young king, the two Baratheon brothers became angry. Stannis had fled King's Landing and sought an army to sack the capital and become king in Tommen's place. He didn't believe the young man was truly Robert's heir, nor did he approve of the blonde's control over him. He condemned the hero and called upon all true Baratheon allies to gather around him and crush the upstart. Stannis had been seduced by the Red Priestess. Unfortunately for Stannis, the Red Priestess had in turn been overpowered by Naruto. She was currently on Dragonstone, having her mind screwed into oblivion by the hero. Her ruby-red hair was covered in Naruto's essence, and he was riding her from behind with abandon. She couldn't remember her original motives for trying to seduce the teenager. Although she found her illusion of youth and beauty coming true, the fox had informed the teenager about her hideous appearance, and Naruto had continued to buck her. With the help of the fox's chakra, her youth became permanent, and she no longer needed the choker around her neck. Stannis ran into the two of them in his war room, crashing into his table, ruining all the pieces on the board. Naruto happily greeted the gruff older man and continued pummeling the priestess. Stannis gasped at the young man's audacity. He was screwing his trump card right in front of him. The woman was screaming that Stannis was a fraud and that Naruto was the true champion of the Lord of Light. While she might have been screaming something else, she wasn't exactly being coherent at the moment. Stannis called the guards to seize the teenager and his heretic witch. Naruto had already planned ahead and foresaw the trouble he would have with Stannis. He continued beating Melisandre while carrying her around the room and beating, pun intended, the guards. Stannis was amazed that the boy could multitask effortlessly. He had little trouble with the guards, and Melisandre continued to scream in ecstasy. Naruto was only toying with the man. He wasn't going to completely destroy him yet. First, he would take his family, then his precious priestess. All would be his while the old warrior waged a losing war. Shireen had already been sent away while he was preoccupied with the redhead. Although Stannis' wife wasn't on his agenda, he took her as well, just to mess with the man. He had so many mental issues that he could see a hint of madness in his eyes. His fervent devotion to the redhead was one of the things that could spell trouble for his daughter if left unchecked. Greeting the man happily, Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke with Melisandre still attached to his pelvis. Stannis was stunned by the utter lack of respect and also by the teenager's use of any kind of magic. He now knew that the boy wasn't some stiff who got lucky in the tournament. He had strength and magic on his side, which unfortunately wasn't something he could hope to match. Davos arrived on the scene too late to do anything about the total destruction the boy wrought. His lord was without his family, and more importantly, his daughter was gone, taken by the teenager. He had no idea what the boy wanted with the toddler, but it couldn't be good. Upon returning to the capital, Naruto ordered his clones to treat the family with respect, but also to restrain the mother in case she became too troublesome. The girl wouldn't be a problem. She was glad to leave that gloomy place. Although she was a little sad to be leaving her father, Naruto had assured her it was for the best. After all, her father was too keen to embrace the religion he'd started burning people for the Lord of Light. It was only a matter of time before he used his daughter as well. Switching with one of his clones, Naruto allowed Melisandre to enjoy a group experience. He had others to take care of. Renly was also absent from the capital, and it seemed he had the same idea as his brother. He had visions of having the throne for himself with Loras as his dirty little secret. Loras had convinced his father to back his brother and begged his sister to marry him. Unfortunately for his father and brother, Marjorie had already been kidnapped by another man. She was another of the many women Naruto had claimed across the kingdom. Mace didn't know his wife and daughter shared the same man, but Allery had been senselessly copulating with the teenager for the past month. Fortunately, there were numerous seals in place to silence the moans and groans emanating from both Allery and Marjorie in the master bedroom. The more the two men tried to back Renly up, the more comfort Naruto brought to Allery and Marjorie. He was tearing the family apart from within, and soon the Tyrells would only back Naruto up. Inside the master bedroom, Allery was being mounted from behind while also sucking on her favorite lollipop. Pounding Lady Tyrell was stimulating for Naruto. Her ass had the cushion to push against and her breasts were definitely spilling out of his hands. She was like a more voluptuous version of her daughter, though Marjorie didn't have anything as bad going for her. Marjorie was being boosted in the breast department by Naruto. The amount of cream and energy Naruto was pumping into her was enough to lift her a cup or two. She was becoming as busted as her mother. Allery was moaning around her treat, and was soon rewarded with more of the cream she always loved to drink. She was filled to the brim from back to front. Her belly was swollen with his seed. She was going to be very full for a long time. Although Naruto wasn't finished with the mother, he carried her to his daughter and left it on his daughter's lips. Naruto was thrusting into Marjorie with the same abandon he did her mother, making her scream and moan for the foreseeable future. She was also enjoying being eaten out by her mother as Naruto filled her to the brim with his essence. Marjorie was almost as bad as her mother. Naruto had filled her up the same amount, and she was giving the cream to her mother. The two redheads were soon covered in Naruto's essence both inside and out, lying in a pool of their own fluids and Naruto's. White was definitely their color, and Naruto was only too happy to give them the look they craved. With the Tyrells at a standstill due to Naruto's divided opinions, the blonde could focus on the other problems of the throne. Flashing through his clones, Naruto stopped at one that attacked Miranda of House Bolton. Although House Bolton was gone, Miranda was still used by Kurama and Naruto as their personal manga. Her cries of pleasure and pain were music to both of their ears. "Kurama, why did you summon me here?" "Well, other than to beat up this masochist. There are rumors in Winterfell. They heard that Ned was taken somewhere and Caitlyn is nowhere to be seen. You should have dealt better with the Lord of Winterfell. Putting him in a trance and settling in with his wife is not the best course of action. Caitlyn can be found in one of the castle's larger rooms receiving the stuffing she loves." Continuing a conversation with the fox while also filling Miranda up was harder than Naruto expected. Without paying attention to the conversation for a moment, Naruto took Miranda to town and pounded her with renewed fervor. Pulling on her hair, Naruto made her arch her back and enjoying new positions for her favorite pastime. Miranda had been reluctant at first, but soon accepted the sleeve treatment when she discovered Naruto to be very persuasive, as well as being the best layman she had ever met. Though it was usually Kurama using her, Miranda enjoyed many group hex sessions with the clones. With her climax at hand, Naruto flipped the former sadist over and sent a deluge of his cream directly onto her face and hair. It dripped all over the girl, and she happily licked her lollipop. All while being covered in white by something other than the snow outside. Miranda was taken over by the many clones around and was presented with a couple more hours of continuous group work. So what are you saying? I say, Kit, that the Stark boy is gathering his knights to march south. He believes that Tommen, the Queen Mother, and you have conspired to take the throne and killed his father, while he holds your sisters and your mother captive. Well, it's not too far off the mark. While keeping them captive is one way of putting it, I'd say they're enjoying the exercise. Whatever the case, what are we going to do about it? I know Caitlin won't be too happy that her oldest is marching with an army. I'll be sure to spare the Stark boy. Besides, he has reasonable grounds for attacking with his army. I mean, I have his father trapped in an illusion. The boy would be a pain in his side, though it was expected given the recent turmoil in his family. With his mother and sisters stranded in the capital, Rob made the right decision to gather his forces. Unfortunately for him, there would be no fairy tale ending. He would face a demon on the battlefield with the full backing of the throne.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.